All right, welcome back to the bench, powered by Wowhead. We are back with episode 4, and it's been a good week. I'm getting super hyped for the expansion. This is going to be the last episode that you're ever going to see of Dragonflight. We got the pre-release coming out soon, the early access for the game. How's it been, Growl and Squishy?
Tettles wanted to do a goodbye Dragonflight episode. All I have to say is rip Bozo. I'm so hyped for the new expansion. I'm ready to move on.
I'm excited to move on as well. I mean, it's going to be an exciting time, and I can tell that Growl is ready to hop in those delves today.
Oh yeah, we got the delve episode. I'm so excited.
Wait, did you actually not like Dragonflight? Why'd you say rip Bozo?
I mean, I'm just trying to move on. Like, I guess in terms of being hyped for the expansion, I feel like this one, I haven't been hyped at all really for War Within until just like within maybe a week, and it's just like building up very rapidly. Like the thought that I'm just ready to go play some new dungeons, and I feel like Dragonflight was okay. Like from a systems perspective, I enjoyed that there was no really annoying grinds. I enjoyed the switch up the dungeons every season, but like I don't know. I guess I don't really have any like very special memories or like crazy stuff for me that happened in Dragonflight that I'm gonna like look back of like super fondly.
Fair. For me, it was pretty chill, especially coming off of Shadowlands. No Torghast to run every week. None of that. Just log in when you want to log in, and I did a lot of keys. This just casual 10s, gearing up lots of vaults. So I had a blast with that.
Yeah, I think for me, I just look back on Dragonflight a bit more fondly because I had a lot more fun playing. Whereas, yeah, I think like Squishy said, I just want to echo the sentiment. I fucking hated Shadowlands. I thought that expansion was trash.
Kiri and Moonkin, by the way.
Not my fault. All right, so let's just talk about the schedule for the next couple weeks. So next week we're gonna have the 27th. We're probably just gonna do like a news show. I think it's gonna be pretty freeform with what we're gonna be talking about. I suspect that there's going to be a lot of stuff going on week 1 of the game that we didn't necessarily cover here that we're going to be able to talk about. There might be some like interview content and like other stuff that always happens. Alternatively, if worst comes to worst, we just get Master of Lists Growl to tier list something. That way we can clickbait that.
Yeah, we'll make a tier list of all of our previous episodes. Make sure you stay tuned for that. No, but seriously, a lot of times at the beginning of an expansion, like, not that this stuff is important, and we're going to talk more about this later, but just like people don't know exactly how the gearing stuff works. Like, for example, Dragonflight, a big thing was farming the rares, and people learned that the item level drops that you got from rares scaled with your item level, and so there was this whole, thing at the beginning of the expansion where you were like doing these rares and gearing up and like doing things in this order. And is any of this important? No, but it's sure as heck fun to talk about. So I think the next episode is definitely going to be, this is week 1. This is all of us are sleep deprived. This is all of the highly degenerate stuff that we're doing. So even though like that's all there is to it, I think that's going to be a banger episode.
Yeah, I remember super rares coming out of nowhere. We had the Fisherman rare, which dropped like 3 times loot and could be summoned. We had the dirt farming. We had the Cobalt Assembly. We had the Black Dragon hyper spawning. Like, so many random things for gear that didn't matter in the end.
There was the Infinite Siege on Dragonbane Keep farm. That was maybe the least relevant thing I've ever seen, but yet people did it.
Weren't you? So wasn't that a thing that it would do a reward like daily or whatever? But it was like you would finish it, and the goal would be to finish it really fast, and then get on another shard, and then do it again, and then keep going on. And be like, all right, who's on Draenor 7? And then okay, he's got a shard. Everybody go! And just all these people just start warping in on this dead server just to get this like terrible M0 piece. I love the beginning of the expansion.
That was the dumbest thing ever.
Oh.
We also had hunts. And by doing hunts, I mean AFKing in the hunt with the hunt is finished backer or Wikora.
That was sick. I was a big fan of that. I made a video about that, and people were not happy that I was advocating for AFKing hunts.
That will always go down in infamy for me, because people ask me occasionally, like, oh, what's the most viewers you've ever had on your stream? And I actually got a host from Max during the drops while I was farming Maruk Centaur rep. So my current world record of the greatest content to have ever happened on my stream with the most viewers is Maruk Centaur farming 20-hour stream.
That is epic. Oh my god. Okay, but yeah, so that's going to probably be next week's episode. There's going to be some nonsense, I'm sure. Then I have question marks down for the 3rd. we'll come up with something. I suspect that that's going to be something that kind of similar to the episode that we're going to do on the 27th. It's just going to be more freeform, talking more or less about what's been happening, state of the game. Then we have the 10th. It's going to be like a prepping for raid, kind of what to expect with the bosses, getting ready for the patch cadence. And then on the 17th, it's the GeoGuessr World Cup weekend, so make sure you watch that.
I was actually going to meme about that in the show notes, and I'm glad that you're actually mentioning it because that's going to be hype.
So completely irrelevant. All right, but the topics for today, we're going to be talking about the release cadence, and then Max got an interview with Morgan Day, and so there's going to be some information that we learned from that interview. I thought that interview was pretty insightful, all things considered.
Yeah, it was a great interview.
I think a lot of the pre-Xpac interviews for like War Within have kind of contained more or less the same content a lot of the time, but I felt like that one with Morgan, you kind of got a bit more under the hood with what's actually going on with like the state of the game and like how the developers have been feeling about things more or less.
Yeah, I mean Morgan Day is always like gets really in-depth answers, and I like interviewing him as well because he's a great person to talk to about things.
Okay, so let's talk about the release cadence a little bit. So first things first, we're gonna have early access on the 22nd. It's going to be launching at 3 p.m. PST and midnight CEST. Those are probably the two most represented time zones, at least for our audience. So those are probably the time zones that you need to be looking out for the most. It's going to be like 6 p.m. EST. So,
what are the odds that the servers will actually be working and you'll be able to play at the times that are allotted?
I've seen a lot of hopium saying that because it's early access and not everybody's going to be on the game at the same time, hopefully the server stability is good.
I actually think it's quite high. I think their launches have been good recently, other than if you're on a very, very populated server. If you are on the Area 52, Area 51?
Area 52 is fine, last Xpac.
Okay. Illidan, I think those servers crashed briefly, but for the rest of it, I think the actual launches have been fine. And then I think they crashed like the day after or something. I don't know, but I have a feeling it's going to be usually okay.
I feel like Draenor EU notoriously goes down every single expansion launch.
Maybe. I'm not too familiar with EU, but yeah,
Do you think the early access is going to play into that, Squishy?
A little. I mean, I think Dragonflight launch was fine, was it not? I don't recall any issues with Dragonflight launch.
I think there was.
Here, I guess it depends on what you're comparing it to. Like any other game in the world that has the most miserable launches, and so in general, Blizzard launches are good. But
yeah,
when you're fiending in every single minute that you're not connected, and that annoying, stupid guy in your guild who you're in a call with is just, oh, I hit level 71, and you just like every single moment is miserable. So it feels like the servers are bad, but no, you're absolutely right. Things aren't nearly as bad. I will say, as like a very short tip, you mentioned Illidan and stuff. If you have multiple characters that you plan on leveling, everyone always wants to level like the most important one first, but I actually always level the one. If you ever have a guy in like a weird server or anything like that, or like you're making, you know what I mean? I actually level a guy that's not on Illidan first, even though my guild is on Illidan, because I don't want to have to deal with logging into Illidan on launch day.
Yeah, I actually remember the Dragonflight launch. It wasn't great. It was on the you had to get on the Zeppelin.
Yeah,
there was
like spam DCs too. So some people were like spam DCing.
You get on the Zeppelin and it would DC you, and then you'd be kicked out. And they added a portal, but that took like an hour or two, and my group was waiting for me. I do remember that. So it wasn't the best, but compared to some of the other launches, you can usually get on. You'll usually have some lag or connection issues, but I compared to other games, I think it's going to be much better.
I remember BFA was completely terrible. I remember Shadowlands was not great. Like, I don't know.
All right, second tip of the week. If you're, let's say you're leveling in a group, I actually think trying to start off with everyone together is a little bit of a trap. Like, play, like, the first little bit and, like, quest a little bit on your own, and then just, like, meet up, you know what I mean? Like, if you're one of the people that can't get on, like, you probably appreciate your buds, like, taking a break or whatever and, like, letting you catch up. But if everybody's waiting, it's, like, it always gets weird. And then some people start ahead or whatever. But, like, if everyone just has an agreement, like, okay, we're going to do the first chapter and then we'll meet up or whatever, I think things go a little bit smoother. Because you don't have to, like, worry about those, you know, microseconds. The very important launch day.
I do think that people, I think just in general though, like leveling as a group with your friends is some of the most fun that you can actually have in the game. So I don't know. I don't know if I would leave your friends behind like that.
This is Copium. The first thing you do the expansion is a scenario this time around. historically, the scenario portion is very hit or miss. But if you manage to get in the scenario and get ahead of the pack, you're usually home free. Because the only issues are you just can't get in the scenario.
It's crazy that they shot Dalaran out of the sky.
Why do you know lore?
I don't know, man. I just was there.
He just got lucky. He just like read a random tweet this morning.
Hey, Tettles, who's the villain of the Xpac?
Xalatath, isn't it?
Okay. Oof.
I only know that because I had to turn Growl into Xalatath last week. Okay, so yeah, on the 22nd, early access goes live. Normal dungeons open. In addition to normal dungeons opening, you are going to be able to have professions. There's renown, and there's maybe delves. I actually don't. Does anybody actually know what's going on with delves at the beginning of the expansion? Are they locked behind level? Like, I know there's leveling delves. I know there's like levels that you do for whenever you're leveling that are delves for that. Is there in-game content delves on launch? Do we know?
So I'm the official delve correspondent here of the bench, as everyone knows. And so my understanding is basically delves levels 1, 2, and 3 are meant as leveling delves where you can just kind of do them whatever. They're very, very easy and they're part of the story. And then after level 3 delves, you need to be max level in order to go into them. It's either at level 3 or level 4, you need to be max level to do the delve. And I assume that those will not be available until Heroic Week, I think. Delves above level 3 are not available until... Because those also have, like, the increased rewards or whatever.
What's the loot situation with delves? Do they just drop loot similar to, like, normal dungeons, or...
Okay, well, we might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but...
Are there end of delve rewards? I guess is what
but it is important because that's like a big question. So basically, delves, when you do them, you get rewarded like certain types of currencies. A lot of the currencies have to do with like transmogs and stuff. Like think of like Mop Remix sort of in a way where you just like do a scenario, you get a currency, you save up a bunch of, you buy like an outfit or whatever, right?
Okay.
Also, there's like random toys and drops and stuff like that. So then at all times throughout the map, like think of like world quests, right? Like there's delves, they sort of like rotate. One of them at all times will be labeled as a bountiful delve. And in that bountiful delve, after you complete it, there will be another chest aside from the normal reward chest that just gives you like the silly currencies or whatever. And in order to open that chest, you will need a delve key.
Okay.
And the delve keys are somewhat limited. It's not something that you can infinitely farm. You get them from basically like, think of like a weekly quest. You might get one, or like, you know, they are in the renown track. I believe after certain renown, you can also just purchase them. So the limitation of the bountiful delves, I believe, has been changed a few times during the beta, and we don't know exactly what it'll be, but the most recent I've heard is you can do one bountiful delve per day. And I don't think this is like finalized as to what the correct answer is, but so basically you'll be able to use one key per day to get one good item level reward. And so when you see things like, so for instance, the level 8 delve, which is the highest it goes, drops a 603 item, but you can only do that, my understanding, once per day. And then that in order to do it, you will need to have a key to go in there that will be like from random rewards and like world quests and stuff.
Okay, but you think that it's only going to be available up to level 3 until Heroic Week?
So my understanding is it's only going to be level 3. The rewards will only be cosmetic or like very low item level. I believe I've heard like 550 or something, which is like, you know, fresh max level gear.
Yeah,
like very, very, very low gear.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so basically you do level 1 through 3 delves, you can get like max, you know, just gear for whatever level your character is, and at max level you're only getting like fresh max level gear, like stuff that you'd expect to get from like, you know, you kill a random guy in the world and you get this.
Yeah. I think that's about what I've heard. I mean, I don't think there's been any confirmation of what delves open up and when, but if they drops higher than level 3 gear, like I think that outscales most of the other world content, so I feel like that seems true. But then with the whole like bountiful delves thing, yeah, it's changed a lot. I've heard something like you can run bountiful delves without a key, and it just drops really low gear, like really low gear, like Growl saying.
Yes.
I have no idea. I have no idea on the daily limit, but there's gonna be something to do there, and I'm sure
I've heard one person say 4 as a daily limit, but that person also said you can only be able to do 6-ish per week, as in like that's how many keys you'll be able to obtain.
4 is the number of keys you get from the weekly quest, I think.
Okay, so who knows? Basically,
Why
there's
haven't they clarified any of this?
Yeah, we look. We need a Delve correspondent asking Morgan Day and Ian these questions. We have all these useless questions about like raid buffs and Mythic Plus affixes. Where are the Delve questions? Like who? No one is out. No one is out there or under there, I should say. Trying to uncover these answers.
You're looking really good with your Chuck E. Cheese looking costume on today, Growl.
Yeah, but okay, so TLDR, there's a limit to the amount of items you can get.
Okay.
It'll probably be around 1 per day.
Okay.
You do them on Heroic Week or later, and the items are slightly better than Mythic 0. So Mythic 0, 597, Delves, 603. And that's the 1 per day limit or 1 per key limit.
Okay, so the pre-expansion goes live, normal dungeons open, and then whenever the expansion goes live, then heroic dungeons open. M0 week is like effectively gone. You're not in any rush to get your characters to max levels. That way you can optimize your M0 lockouts. So I think that heroic dungeons are going to be what most people are going to be doing for gearing options. Is there anything that we've seen, Squishy, on the beta, like Trial of Flood, rare farming, super rares? Is there any of that? Like, do we even know?
I mean, I have no idea. I really don't. I'm sure people will find out the most efficient things to do come live, and people will figure it out. You'll have a Tettles video, you'll have a Wowhead post, you'll have Growl with his number 1 new stream title with
20-hour stream.
So I think most of it will come with time, because I don't think anybody's out there farming rares and gearing up on that and reporting on it.
Growl was looking at
reporting on it is the big one. The reporting on it is the big one because a lot of this is related to Race to World First prep. And so those people who are doing that are not necessarily talking about what they found out and what they're doing. If there is some crazy way to get, better gear or whatever, like why would they tell anybody? Like they're just going to wait for that to go live instead of like, this magical Reddit checklist. So yeah. And also no one even knows how stuff is going to work too. Like, they might just randomly buffer reward, or it might have worked a different way on beta. So my opinion is, unfortunately, it sucks to not be fully in the loop, but you just sort of have, the most important thing is you keep an ear to the ground when the game is live, and you sort of like see what people are doing, see what streamers are doing, like check Reddit, like very quickly when someone finds something, like, it gets spread.
It's on Reddit, it's on the streams, or it's in LFG if it's a group thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I found out about Cobalt Assembly too. I was literally just hanging out with friends at like 3 a.m. and somebody was like sitting there and they're like, wait, look at this ring on this vendor. What is this? And then we're just like, what is this?
Yeah.
Speaking of that, by the way, talking about Renown, because you kind of quickly brushed over it, but I want to talk about that too. At the beginning, and now, okay, as a disclaimer, all the stuff that we're talking about on week 1 and whatever, this is not important to do. We talk about it because we're World of Warcraft people. We have brain damage. We love to just do this ridiculously min-maxy nonsense stuff. If you are like, oh no, like I don't want to have, nobody has to do this. You will never, those stupid cobalt rings sat in my bags. I didn't even equip them for a single dungeon, and I spent hours farming those just because. Okay, So in the Renown tracks, there are various different things that you may end up wanting to get. So a few examples of ones that were in Dragonflight also are very quickly returning. There is one that you get like a, what is it called? The thing that you make with the crests that costs like 60 that you use to craft a heroic level item. You know what I'm talking about? Like the crest, the enchanted crest thing.
Yeah, the enchanted.
There's one of those. Yeah. So there's one of those at the end of one of the Renown tracks. There's several keys in the Renown tracks. And if that ends up being like, I'm guessing you're going to get like 5 or 6 easy keys to get. And then if you want to be a fiend, you might be able to get additional keys from the renown track to do 1 or 2 extra 603 items in those early week. Also, like, I think just random rep items, like sometimes there's like a slightly above Mythic 0 cape or whatever, like, and again, none of this is important, but I believe there's like usually one very stupid thing in each reputation, and each one takes a very long time for you to farm out. So it's very likely that if you're trying to play the I want to be the rank 1 item level person in the world game, you're probably going to have to do ridiculous stuff to max out every reputation. No one has to do this. Again, this is just like, if you want to do that, those are some of the things that you're going to see people doing.
I think the important thing to note is if you do get those keys, don't use them if delves are capped. Only use them on like tier 8 delves. Because you don't want to waste those keys. So,
so you would say this for Heroic Week?
Keys are definitely limited.
Okay.
So if you use them before Heroic Week and the delves are capped at 3 or 4 or whatever, like you're getting 5 under 600 item level. But if you wait till Heroic Week, then you're getting over 600 item level. So, definitely worth that.
Also, I think it will matter. Okay, so basically none of this has staying power. The only thing that might have staying power is the Enchanted Crest, depending on what track it's on. Say it's like a hero track crest. We saw this with the Dream Surge rep. What was that rep?
Dream Warden.
Yeah. We saw it with the Dream Warden's rep, where you would end up wearing that hero track crest for an extended period of time. Now, it does unfortunately take up your spark, but if you're really like Worm and Aspect crest limited, a lot of the time that free 60 or whatever Worm's crest could actually be potentially pretty good.
Yeah, and that, I mean, especially if you put it on an embellishment early, like it does use your spark, but
Imbells are really bad.
Okay.
I don't know what to think about the embellishments, but I've been looking at some of them. Not all of them are implemented in Simulation Craft, so I had to finish my Wowhead guide, and then I put a disclaimer. I'm like, sims aren't in. I'll update this later. But looking at some of the sims on early ones, they are really bad. I don't really know what to think about embellishments so far.
Is that the same for you, girl?
Right now, the healers, I'm kind of like waiting on them. Like, I wish that the theory crafters would hurry up. Like, I'm trying to make YouTube guides here, and they don't have all this information, and I need to pretend like I figured it out. So if they could just hurry that up in the class discords, that would be great. But yeah, it's basically the same thing. Like, we're seeing, when we talk about embellishments, we're seeing like 1% or less gains in terms of like, spending the money on making these things, and that's like, comparing it to nothing. So like the difference between like the number 1 embellishment and the number 5 embellishment is like, fractions of a percent.
So I was talking to Karasis a little bit a couple weeks back, and he was saying that some of the embellishments are actually worse than wearing the 639 gear. So the embellishments, whenever you craft them at max gear, you're crafting them at 636. And he was saying that the 3 item levels that you're getting from the embellishment in some instances is better than the embellishment itself. Like that they are very weak right now.
Look, they still have, I don't know, 3 weeks to do it before Season 1 releases? Plus a Heroic Week?
Yeah. I will also say that the ones that are similar to the Blue Silken Lining, the ones where you get stats whenever you're above 80% HP, don't scale with item level either. Whereas in the past, Blue Silken Lining scaled with item level, which was why it was actually good. But now this is like 700 crit, which is not very much.
I mean, the upside to this is those things were kind of expensive, especially when you made them early in the expansion.
Lariat.
And it was very annoying that every single class had 2 quote-unquote like BIS embellishments that you needed to craft. And you kind of were torn between like, well, this item is a bigger upgrade for me now, but this is a BIS embellishment, and I need to make this eventually, and I can only make one thing every 2 weeks or every week or whatever. So embellishments being weak could actually make things feel better, because like if you really care about it and you want to craft a piece, like you can put an embellishment on it, spend a little bit extra money, get a small gain, but it's like not something that you need to worry about itemization wise. So I don't think that's necessarily an unhealthy place to be. It feels a little lame that there's this like system in the game that exists that you don't care about, but it's, it would be the equivalent of like, oh, do I put an enchant on this piece of gear? It's like, well, if you got the money, why not? But like, it doesn't really matter. You know?
Are there any power gained things behind professions this expansion? There was like a slight power gain behind alchemy last expansion where you would get like slightly better health pots, right? Like you would actually heal yourself a little bit more. Is there anything like that again?
Ooh, I don't know.
I'm not familiar with. I've heard alchemy and engineering have cool stuff, but I don't know the specifics right now. I'll have to check on that later.
So I've seen some of the cool stuff from engineering. So engineering has jumper cables now. So we're actually going back to the past where you no longer have to craft a piece of gear with the group battle res on it. Now it's just an item that you put in your bags, and that's great. They also have the saviors returning. It's like a doggo button thing that you have to press after combat starts. So it's fine.
Didn't that exist in Dragonflight, but no one ever used it?
Yeah, they're called saviors. Literally, nobody ever used it outside of the.
Okay,
GP
that thing
teams.
killed you. That thing was troll.
Yeah,
It casted the res. It resed everybody, and then it blows up. Meaning, if you took the res before it blows up, it kills you the second you res. That thing was cool as hell.
Blizzard.
Didn't that happen in MDI to Gingy? I think it did, actually.
He got knocked off the edge during an MDI match one time by it. Blizzard has a hard on by it. They love to make engineering stuff backfire. They just love that for some reason. That's like, some guy who's responsible for professions is just in their Irvine office and he's like, you know what I got to do today? I got to make engineering stuff backfire. And then he's just like cooking like the most insane backfire shit ever. Like somebody's trying to engineering battle res. And what if they turn into a rat? Wouldn't that be so funny?
I mean, my chat loves it. It's one of those things where, like, you can meme on him all he wants, but the suffering that I endured in that key that I depleted, I'm pretty sure enough people got an amazing laugh out of it that somehow that was probably a good decision by them.
It is really funny. I will say it's just so random that it happens. But again, the jumper cables actually being you can just like buy them on the auction house, and so now everybody has access to a battle res, and so that's actually pretty positive.
That is a good change. Having to craft bracers in Dragonflight with your spark and like waste a spark meant nobody had like battle res early in the season.
Oh, this is gonna be my tip of the week. I'm just gonna say it now too. The only other major profession change that I've seen is invisibility pots are now on their own unique 10-minute cooldown, so they no longer share cooldown with damage pots or anything like that. So Shroud has been power crept a little bit.
Didn't we talk about this last week?
Might have.
I remember Growl saying something about like.
True. Yeah, you're right.
Something about not being able to invis pot. Yeah,
I use invis pots liberally, and then I just lie and say that my DPS pot.
Oh yeah, we did have this conversation.
That's okay. That's another tip. Great tip of the week, Tettles.
I'm having deja vu.
I was having deja vu.
What were we even talking about? Weren't we talking about heroic week?
We were talking about early access, and then we were talking about heroic weeks. Yeah, with M0s, and there's no rush to get your M0s.
That's my segue back to where we were talking
about. So speaking of dungeons, by the way, and professions. Aren't there profession buffs this time around, Tettles? I know you were telling me.
Yeah.
Do they still exist?
So City of Threads has one for tailoring where it's a single target 12-second stun. I think it can stun even like some mini bosses sometimes. So it's fairly solid in terms of what it can stun. It can stun like a hauler. It's not like the craziest thing ever, but a 12-second stun is not like.
Is that the only one?
No, there's an engineering buff in the first area of City of Threads. I think I said City of Threads for the last
tailoring.
No, that one's Arakara is the tailoring. City of Threads has an engineering buff where it's 15% damage, 15% healing for 25 seconds, and there's 4 of these like bugs that you can click. Looks like you're going to be pulling around the first area around that tailoring buff. There is a blacksmithing dwarf one in Stone Vault where it gives you 10% versatility for 10 minutes, and then there is obviously the Mist of Tyrannus Scythe Herbalism Druid one. And what I will say is the tailoring one is, what is it? It's tailoring mage, and then the engineering one is engineering rogue priest, and then the blacksmithing one is blacksmithing dwarf warrior. So there's like
so they're adding classes to it.
Yes, there's classes, races, and professions to each of the buff. So you need to have at least 25 of that profession's level to interact with the buff. But also they're available to just like random themed things that are similar. So like for example,
it's core to start.
Yeah, and even in like for Mists of Tyrannus Scythe, like there's the doors that you used to be able to open with Night Fae, and now if you are like a druid or a tauren or like an herbalist or like a night elf, right? Like and like random races and classes and like things can open them. So very likely you will have somebody in your group that has them. It's a lot less restrictive than it was in Shadowlands, where it was like you need to have this one covenant or whatever. There's like various different things that And then usually the big ones, the biggest one is the blacksmith buff.
That stone vault one is cool.
Stone vault, yeah. So that's a 10-minute 10% versatility buff, which like basically you could use that for like a lust pull and a really hard boss, and it's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
This is a random tip as well. There are profession buffs in the raid as well.
What?
Yeah.
What do they do?
I can't remember. I tested, so there's a tailoring one. There's a jewel crafting one. They help you do trash faster because there's a lot of trash.
Oh, okay.
I think I'm death running anyways.
I just remember the jewel crafting one is like literally between Silken Court and the last boss. The tailoring one is on the way to Kyvexa.
Okay.
And then there were other ones that I couldn't even figure out because they weren't active when the instance reset. So cool benefit, I guess. Yeah, I mean it's not going to impact your like encounters, but to clear trash faster, then
I don't know. What do you think about the profession buff? What do you guys think about the profession buffs in dungeons? I think that they've gone through. People were pretty upset with Court of Stars ones, I think, but are these better?
I think they're cool. Like, so basically the purpose is like, if you're somebody who is I'm doing the dungeon 1 or 2 time enjoyer, finding it out for the first time is like a cool little thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they really impact people who are doing dungeons regularly. Like, the fact that, so many different groups of people can get them. So, I mean, I think it's like fine. It's one of those things where it's like not really for us, right? It's for like, you're doing the dungeon the first time and like, look at this anvil over here. What does this do?
I think they're quite cool. I questioned when they were profession only, but if they're Court of Stars and there are multiple ways to do it, I think that's great. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to hear that races and classes can do it. As long as checkpoints are not tied to these buffs.
So the checkpoint in Mists isn't tied to the. Okay, well, hold on. The first checkpoint in Mist isn't.
Heard that it wasn't. It used to be, and there was a patch notes that says that it wasn't anymore, and anybody can click this.
That's what I remember.
So the first one, that's true. The second one is not.
It's almost like they didn't even know there was 2 seeds, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we should fix this," and they fixed the one. They're just like, "Yeah, all right, looks good."
Yeah. So like the first one, like right before you go into the maze, anybody can click that. I click that on my evoker all the time. The second one, after you jump down after Mistcaller, is still required to be those race spec combos, which I think they might change. I wouldn't be shocked if they were like, wait, that wasn't intended, and they go back and change it later. I will say, just circling back a little bit, the difference between this and Court of Stars is Court of Stars was like random, and you had to have every single combination of every single thing that you could possibly have for every dungeon, whereas this is like, there's one buff in one dungeon. You're like,
yeah,
either we have it or we don't.
Now, circling back to heroic dungeons,
okay,
that open on official launch. Heroic dungeons are M0 difficulty from Dragonflight, right? Like these are actually not going to be the easiest thing in pushovers.
Oh,
correct. Basically, so it'll be a little different. So HP and damage, like scaling wise, they are scaled the same as Mythic 0.
Yeah.
And for people that aren't super familiar, like don't remember what it's like, Mythic 0 is basically like pretty much anybody can pug it as a fresh-ish 60. If you have people to play with, you can usually expect to breeze through them in one sesh, but you might have a few wipes. If you're totally random pugging it, you may have an interesting group that struggles with certain bosses. But keep in mind the big difference here, my understanding is that Heroic doesn't have mythic mechanics. So all of the bosses will be much more simple because they're missing those mythic mechanics that normally are in the M0s. So you're much less likely to get hard stuck on a boss because all of the bosses will be easier than otherwise they would be like normally on M0 week.
Probably true, yeah. I assume that, I mean, I don't know what the difference is between Heroic and Mythic, but I assume you're still going to get the majority of the fight, like, the Stone Vault's twins, you're going to get the box mechanics and stuff like that. So you can learn a lot from doing Heroic dungeons if you've never done them before. And I think they'll be a ton of fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's definitely the way dungeons scale right now in like, okay, there's Heroics, then there's M0s, and then there's M+. I really, really like the way that they're scaling in terms of like learning the dungeons. So you have Heroics, which are basically normals, which are like impossible to wipe unless you're really trying to. Then Heroics are like what you do them at max level. They're a little bit more challenging, but for the most part, they're not super hard. You can at least learn everything. And then M0 is going to be like actually difficult stuff where you may need to gear up and like learn and do the mechanics well, but there is no timer, no affixes, no anything. And then eventually you get into Mythic Plus, which is like, you know, the end game stuff.
What are you doing for your YouTube video series? I saw that you released a video on Arcar and Stone Vault. What's the goal here?
My plan is to do the 4 new dungeons that are coming out. So I'm not touching Miss Necrotic Wake, Siege, or Grim Batol. And so I want to do 4 guides for the new 4 fresh dungeons that are going to be in War Within Season 1.
You're not going to do one for Meadery and the other ones?
Correct. And I sort of want to, but the guides are something for me that take quite a lot of time, and they're like, it's just so hard to get out guides for all the classes and all the dungeons that I want to do. But at the same time, like, I know a lot of people do like my guides, and I wanted to talk about some stuff, so I kind of settled on like a couple of the healers, a couple of the dungeons. Like, it seems a little wonky, but that's sort of my goal. Is like, if you're following my stuff and you watch it, you'll definitely have a leg up and you'll understand things. And like, but I'm not going to be like super thorough and have every single dungeon, every single healer, just because it's going to be way too hard.
Okay, so I think we talked about the launch, kind of what's available, what's more to see. So then after that, on September 10th, so 2 weeks later, after the global launch happens, then we're gonna have a heroic week. Squishy, can you explain what heroic week means to those who have never seen like a heroic week in general? You're muted, noob.
Sorry. Before Dragonflight, we had a heroic week, which is 1 extra week where usually Mythic Plus, formerly Mythic Plus, was capped at a lower item level, and Mythic Raid was not open yet. We didn't have that in Dragonflight at all. That this week was removed, but it's coming back for the first tier in Season 1, and we will basically have no Mythic Raid on this week, assuming and no Mythic Plus during this week as well. Delves, I don't know what's going to be open during this week.
I think it's very likely that Delves are going to be open all the way until level 8s, or maybe even all of the Delves will be open, and you'll be able to get rewards up to 603. I would be very surprised. To me, it seems like it's kind of obvious that they want to let Delves, like, this is their new thing. If they put these in on Heroic Week, everyone's going to do them, and if they don't, nobody's going to do them in terms of like streamers. And I think that I just fully anticipate that Delves are going to have a full release on Heroic Week, and that their rewards are going to be limited but slightly better than that you get at M0.
Has anybody looked at PvP gear at all? Is it going to be worth doing PvP?
I'm not a PvPer.
So in the past, whenever we had Heroic Weeks, PvP gear was pretty valuable. So since then, Blizzard has actually changed the PvP gear to have this like plus 20 item level modifier on it. But I don't know if there's any like conquest gear that you can potentially get from PvP that ends up being like any relevant item level. I haven't really looked at it. But the PvP season also starts during Heroic Week, so.
Growl?
Yeah, it simply depends on your... Basically, you have to be so much better at PvP than anything else in order to make doing PvP worth it. Like, it's not something that you should go about doing unless you're already, like, a PvP main.
Yeah. Then, the week after that, September 17th, Mythic Raid opens, M Plus opens, and the game is just... It's going to be functioning as normal. What's the cadence with the Catalyst?
I was just about to ask that. We haven't heard a dang thing on that.
Has it been so in Dragonflight Season 3? Was it like out on the first week and it had a charge on the first week?
Yes,
like the Mythic Raid release.
Yeah, and there was 1 per week. I think it was the first week.
It was 1 per 2, but I think you had one on launch.
That might be right, and then they reduced it to 1 after.
So speaking of Catalyst, to maybe rewind a little bit to talk about Heroic Week. So a really big thing early on is going to be getting that 4-piece together. Like, depending on the character, getting your 4-piece can be a big part of your DPS or HPS. And so when it comes to acquiring gear that's tier, you generally get one sort of like freebie token that you get for either completing AOTC heroic or like getting some level of Mythic Plus rating. So for most people, by the end of week 2, that'll be something that they can have or come close to having. If we assume that you're going to get a catalyst charge, that's going to be a second piece. So you're going to be looking for 2 pieces of some sort of heroic or some sort of tier before then. So some of your options for getting tier on heroic week, there's going to be no Mythic Plus, and M0s don't give any tier. So one thing that's going to be very important that you're going to want to sink a lot of time into is pushing as far as you can in the raid. Even if you are somebody who is not in a guild or whatever, just dedicating a lot of time to pugging to clear as many normal and heroic bosses as you can to increase your chance at getting a tier piece can mean the difference of having 4-piece or not having 4-piece for an entire week. Another thing about delves is that they are in a great vault slot now, and you can also get tier gear from the delves. And so while you may be doing higher level keys or raid, and you might not care about the delve rewards from a vault perspective, you do have a chance to get tier. So you may want to fill out your delve vaults. And I don't know how the vaults are going to be in the early weeks, because normally there's no PvP, no M+, and no raid in the first 2 weeks of the season, right? So there's no vault. But now there's going to be delves. You'll be able to do some sort of something. So maybe there will be a delve-only vault or something. We don't know about that, but that's another thing that you may want to be paying attention to and see.
Oh, that would be wild. Hold on.
Just to note, that row is not just delves. It's all open world content. Some of the open world content also contributes to that.
What does it even mean? Like a world boss? Like world question?
To my knowledge, I'm not 100%.
Captain Lancer?
Stuff like the soup, the Dragon Maid Cube. I think that's the new public events give it. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's not just delves, but most people who are looking for gear will be doing delves anyways. But if you're a soup connoisseur...
I had a question about tier. I will say that unlike on Dragonflight launch, tier across the board is like pretty, like a lot worse. Most of the tier set bonuses that you're seeing are somewhere between like 3 to 5% power gains from like 0 to 4 set. So if you actually miss and you don't end up getting your 4 set as fast as possible, it's less bad than it was in the past. Obviously, it's not gonna be optimal. People hate playing without tier sets, so it does kind of suck. But it's
right. Well, keep in mind we're comparing 0 tier to tier, right? Like normally you go from season 2 to season 3, you have to lose your old tier for new tier. Right now you're going from 0 tier to getting tier. So even though it is only 5%, like that's going to feel like a lot, I think. Yeah. And even if it was 0%, like people are still going to be miserable, and people are going to write in the description when they apply to your group, I have 4-piece, even though they don't or whatever. Like that's definitely a big meta early on in the season.
On Dragonflight launch though, a lot of people's tier sets were between like 8 to 12%. So like the haves and the have-nots were like way bigger, right? Too. Okay. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. So to summarize, early access, and then in the first 2 weeks, you want to be mostly focused on leveling up your guys and exploring. Some people like the story, some people like doing stuff. There is no rush to do anything. Absolutely nothing is going to be important at all for the long-term success of your character in that time. So just level up. By far, the most important thing you can do is level up your alts, because everybody's going to be leveling, spamming dungeons. It's going to be way more fun and way easier to level up a character now. You're not going to want to do that in a month or two. Then the Heroic Week comes out. This is the 3rd week of the expansion. Everything is still gear limited, but we expect to get better gear from key-gated bountiful delves, M0s, and from Heroic Raid. You should prioritize Heroic Raid for sure, because that's going to be the best loot that you'll be able to get. Even pugging, as miserable as it sounds, that's going to be some good loot. And then the 4th week, the week of September 17th, that's when essentially the floodgates open and everything is fair game. You can spam M+, you can do whatever raid, Mythic Raid is out, race to world first, etc.
One thing to note, by the way, on Heroic Week, M0s are a daily lockout. They're not weekly lockout. You can run M0s every day if you wanted to.
I forgot they changed that.
If you wanted to, that is a way to get gear. There are probably some good trinkets that are going to be there, but if you want to run M0s on every character every day, go for it.
Yes, keep in mind M0 will feel way different, right? And M0 is going to be like an M0 is gonna. I made a video about this. An M0 is gonna be a lot harder than you expect it to be. Like it's gonna be people like the idea of randomly pugging an M0 will probably not be a thing. Like because how do you even vet people? You know what I'm saying? Like think about a Mythic 10. Like trying to do a Mythic 10 on the literally day. Imagine day 1 of the expansion, like when Mythic Plus opens. Imagine trying to do a +10 with 4 other people that you have no idea how to vet. Like this could be the person's very first dungeon they've ever done, and they're in your M0, which is the equivalent of an M10. Like it's gonna be brutal out there trying to randomly pug with people that you don't know.
The interesting thing about that is the lockout system, because it's M0. If you let's say you kill the first boss of Stone Vault somehow, and then you get to the twins. I keep bringing up the twins because it's the biggest boss.
The machinists.
Yeah. And you get there, and then you wipe, and you wipe, and you wipe, and the group breaks up. Now you're locked to the first boss. Like, I guess you could run the entire thing again, but, like, it's just a little bit of extra thing that you didn't really need to do before.
Right. Well, to be clear, though, it's not like a Mythic lockout in terms of you can't play with anybody else. You can still find a new group, but for instance, what will happen is you'll do the first boss, you'll get whatever loot you get, whether you get an item or not. Then if you happen to find another group because your group dies to Master Machinist or whatever, you are not eligible for loot from that first boss. So every time you'll have to kill that boss every time. Well, technically you could just host the group yourself and the boss is gone. Yeah, it's gonna be weird.
So the downside of doing it like that too, and the rest of your group might not know this, but there's a chance that you just don't get loot then if you're already locked to that boss. Because the loot will just then evaporate. So other players are really not incentivized to play with you if you're already locked to one of the bosses.
Well, assuming that you can get something
so
that
I
you
wouldn't
would
mention
trade.
that to them.
Well, no, that's assuming that you can get something that you would trade, which on week 1 you do not expect people to be able to trade this stuff.
I think that's valid. I will say
I wouldn't worry about it so much, but it will be funny when only one item drops and you have to then you play the Among Us game of who was the person that was in here earlier in the day that wiped and couldn't finish it and now is back in here, and everyone pretends that it wasn't them.
I will say also the M0 dungeons are going to be the Season 1 dungeons, so they're not going to be... You're not going into Cinderbrew Meadery, you're not going to Rookery. So the dungeons that you're doing on like Heroic and Normal, not all 8 of those dungeons are going to be the M0 dungeons. Instead, it's going to be the Season 1 dungeons. It's going to have Grim Batola, it's going to have Mists, and it's going to have Necrotic Wake in it.
Right, and that was the main reason why, when it coming back to my guides, why I only did the 4 that will be in Season 1. Because all of the other dungeons, you'll have so much time to just learn in a very low-stress environment, but very likely all 4 of those new dungeons that are in Season 1, you will be faced with doing your first M0 of those dungeons, and that will be hard.
Anybody have any leveling tips or anything?
I've heard leveling is very quick. I've heard someone estimated 4 to 5 hours.
Oh, that's not bad.
That I was in.
I
heard leveling is going to be super chill.
I know that if you just do the main story quest, gets you to about 76.5. There is a campaign locked quest at 78, so you do need to do a little bit of side questing.
Ooh, that's very, very good to know.
So a little bit of side questing. I think it's maybe 1 zone of side questing if they didn't change anything.
Okay.
But also random tip. And I'm sure there's going to be a trading post, checklist thing that you do complete some of the side quests. So it might help you with your future trading posts if you do that as well.
Yeah, what Squishy's saying, just to clarify so people understand, is different parts of the campaign as you go through and level up are gated behind levels. Yes. So you won't be able to progress until you get to X level. And so what he's saying is there's a gate at 78 that if you're just following the story, you will get stuck, and you will be level 76 and change, and it'll be you need to be level 78 to get this. And the implications of that are, while you're doing the main story quests and you see, oh, here's a side quest that's pretty close, you should probably do those easy, low-hanging fruit side quests as you go through. If you see a world quest or some sort of world event, you should stick around to try and do that, because it's better than, okay, now you're at this wall and now you have to backtrack and figure out what you need to be, because you'll be in a much better situation if you're close to 78, because there will be some necessary side stuff that you'll have to do.
Yeah. There's also a XP bonus for every 80 that you hit, so your alts will level faster. I think it's 5% per level. 80.
Really?
So yeah,
yep, it's up to 5, isn't it?
Up to 5, yep.
Yep.
So
No, I didn't know
level your
that
first character. Level your first character. Your next one will be 5% faster, and then 10% faster, and then 15% up to 25% bonus XP. So it's really, really good for the altars. Great bonus for warbands. And yeah, I think that's some good leveling tips there.
Yeah, I actually didn't know.
Squishy has much better leveling tips than me. Mine were like, leave your friends behind, you'll catch them later.
That was, I feel like nobody wants to actually do that. That sucks.
Oh,
But my point was more so like, you'll be able to run into your friends later, so don't freak out early. My tip kind of maybe got lost in the sauce there. But my point is like,
friends.
you're gonna be leveling and you're gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna go take a break and get some food. Like, I don't know.
I
do
think
have
it
one
was
more
like
tip,
abandon your friends. That's what I thought the tip was.
I mean, it was. I'm sorry that you're on some stupid server and you can't log in or you have internet problems or whatever. Like, I'm not waiting for you, okay? Like, sorry.
Yeah, give me one more tip here. So there is one campaign quest that requires you to do a dungeon. It requires you to do the dungeon, and you need to complete the campaign in order to unlock world quests and delves and stuff like that.
Okay.
That dungeon is the Rookery, and you can do it on follower dungeon mode if you don't want to find people or don't have a group.
What's the fastest way of doing it?
Not follower dungeon.
Okay. Okay.
Follower dungeon is for the people who don't want to pug or anything like that and just kind of want to slowly progress through it. Obviously, with the group of 5 that you know is going to be the best. Otherwise, you do have to queue for it. So it is required for the campaign. But a good time to do side quests if you're waiting in queue.
Very good. All right, cool.
Yo, massive tip of the week. People keep forgetting about this. I keep telling people in my Discord, more so probably for healers than other people because you care about add-ons that relate to your frames. Follower dungeons are like by far the best place to test your weak auras and add-ons and stuff. There are so many people that are setting up their UIs and trying to get ready, but they don't know, like they don't want to queue into a dungeon or like find people to play with or whatever. Literally, you can go into the menu where LFG is and just instead of picking normal or heroic, you just pick follower and you go in and then they'll sit there, they'll wait for 2 hours while you tinker with everything, and it's just like you can simulate having a full group. That is like by far the best place to test all of your UI stuff is follower dungeons.
The downside
I've heard
is
free
people
mage food.
Oh wait, you can get free mage food from that?
I've heard that. I haven't confirmed it myself, but
The downside of doing that is if you're in there for 2 hours, your friends are going to see you on your friends list just sitting in the Rookery for 2 hours. They'll be like, what is that guy doing in there? Okay, last major topic that we have for this show. Max had a great interview with Morgan Day. I actually felt like we learned a lot. He asked, I think, some pretty interesting questions. Of course, we all come from a high-end background, and I think that the questions that Max asked, while Growl says, what about me? What about the Delve guys? What about the mole people? Unfortunately, none of those questions were asked. Instead, it was more about things like raid buffs and stuff like that. What were some of the most important things that you guys think that we saw out of this interview?
Morgan Day almost said mole people. He didn't say it, but like you knew he was thinking it. Man, it sounds stupid, but it was such a surreal moment for me. I feel like I'm like a lot of other people in that I've grown up and gone my whole life playing Blizzard games. And many times I've been that person yelling at the clouds or like posting on forums, and to actually have like the official game director acknowledge a meme that I made is like, oh yeah, I made it. I made it.
I need to cut in here. So they talked about Arcane Intellect in this interview.
Yeah.
About it possibly being nerfed.
Yeah.
Breaking news, it is being nerfed on the weekly reset to 3% from
What?
5%.
Hold on, I'm reloading Wildhead.
Breaking news on the bench.
In addition, Chaos Brand also being reduced to 3% on the weekly reset, down from 5%. So both Mage and DH raid buffs being nerfed.
Dude, you're leaking this before Wildhead even has this. Whatever we're recording, how does it even happen?
Oh, don't stop! No, this is good. This is good.
That's crazy.
But yeah. What are your thoughts on it then? It's live news.
Brand. Okay, so Morgan did mention that they would maybe be looking at Chaos Brand and AI during this interview, right? Just talking about how strong they were. I mean, Chaos Brand is weird because Chaos Brand in the past, 5% damage. Most specs in the game, no matter if you're melee or ranged, actually have some contribution from magic damage. Like Unholy Death Knight, Havoc Demon Hunter, Assassination Rogue does a lot of magic damage. Ret Paladin does a decent amount of magic damage. So it's not like these melee specs only do Fizz. And it's like, it's weird because Mystic Touch is still being left at 5%. It was known as a much worse buff, but now Chaos Brand, really interesting. And then AI. I don't know if Arcane Intellect necessarily needed to get nerfed. I'm a bit surprised.
They are popping off in Dorky's chat. Max got mages nerfed. Max does it again. The age of wizards is ending. I mean, honestly, I think Morgan Day nailed it on the head, and I feel like it was actually such an aware comment about what's going on. The simple fact is, okay, if you're a mage, you're not doing half physical and half magic damage. You're doing full magic damage, right?
Yes.
Compared to if you're a demon hunter, you're not doing full physical damage. You're doing some mix of physical and magic damage. And so inherently, a buff that increases the magic damage of your party is just strictly better than a buff that increases the physical damage. And then likewise, when it comes to Arcane Intellect, 5% in buffs your healer. Like 5% of others, like what other buffs give you 5% of a stat?
Like fortitude is 5% stamina.
Yeah, okay, I guess, but that's a little different though, I think, right? Like that's not buffing the throughput. That's just buffing your health.
Hunter's 5% damage.
I think these two buffs were my biggest complaint about raid buffs is by far they're just way too strong, like way stronger than they need to be. Like I think the fact that these buffs can be half or a quarter of as strong as they are and still serve the purpose, I think just shows that they need to be nerfed, and I'm glad that they're doing it, and this is cool. I actually think this will basically change nothing, but it'll sure make people happy.
I don't think they did the mage one enough. I think the mage one is still the most powerful one.
Really?
If it's a similar thing to Aug, right? Like it benefits your healer more. Like maybe like if they're bringing it both down to 3%, maybe 2.5 for Arcane Intellect, but like if we're trying to balance them, like you have Hunter's Mark, which isn't nearly as strong. I can't quantify 2% mastery, but like for the shamans,
the auto attack thing is really big for Frost and like assassination.
Yeah, fair. There's some specs there, but Druid buff is obviously still very strong. I mean, that's 3% verse.
It's 3% versatility, yeah.
Which is 3% damage, like
1.5% DR.
Which makes sense. Like it seems like they're going for a little less on the raid buff. So AI was definitely a little more than that. So
what I will say is, okay, so I just pulled up a random log here. Whenever you're looking at Arcane Intellect and raid buffs in general, it's one of those things that the 5% magic damage, say it ends up only being 2.5% of your group's damage in total, it ends up still allowing them to be brought. So even if it is, say they nerf it down to 3%, say only half of your specs in your raid actually end up being affected by that, a 1.5% damage gain across your entire raid is actually still a pretty sizable contribution amount. Like if you're looking at the mages here, if it's only if it's actually 1.5% of their damage, they go from being in like 6th place on the damage meter to actually being in 2nd place on the damage meter. So it's still going to force you to play all of those buffs in raid. And I don't think that like if they nerfed all of them down to 3% or whatever, you still want them all in a raid. But I do think that the nice thing is that they're a lot less impactful in M+ now. That's like a pretty big portion of this change, is that they're less impactful in M+ just as a whole.
Yeah, I mean that's the purpose, right? People can say anything they want, but in my eyes, the main purpose of raid buff is to guarantee that there's one of those classes in every raid,
and there still will be.
That's going to happen no matter what.
Yep. Yeah. I just think these were the best ones by far, and now they're kind of more in mind.
Yeah, and I sort of agree with what Squishy's saying, is that okay, now they need to take every raid buff and then cut it again across the board, right? Like Arcane Intellect could be 2% or something and it would still be good. Mark of the Wild could be 2%, but it's a step in the right direction for sure. And I think especially for M+, people will be happier about this change.
I do. I mean, we talked about this a couple of times on the show. I do still think that raid buffs were a little bit overstated as to what their power was in M+. At the end of the day, you could kind of quantify just like what the power of this realistically is. And in a game mode where some specs are doing 10, 15, 20% more throughput, not just damage. I'm talking like healer throughput, DPS throughput, have 15% better tank survivability, stuff like that. Raid buffs were very rarely the reason that a spec would be brought, and frankly, if raid buffs were the reason that a spec was brought, the balancing of the classes relative to one another, especially in 5-man content, was already pretty good. Because in addition to that, you're not actually getting, whenever you look at like a raid in total, like these specs are only doing 5-6%. So a raid buff that gives you 5% intellect across your entire raid is actually a lot more valuable than in a 5-man group where you're doing like one player's doing 25% of the damage of the entire dungeon. But great changes. But you guys think that like 1.5% intellect is better? Something for AI?
I mean, the smaller the better, but I think it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I mean, clearly the best answer is just to not have them. Like, I think, in my opinion, if the Race to World First wants to run 19 Warlocks and beat the raid, I don't really care. Like, if a guild, I don't think the lives of other people should be made worse. Like, I'm not really sure that this whole argument about it's fun to buff everybody up. In general, raid buffs to me feel like a responsibility that people don't want. Like how many times have you had to yell at somebody in your group or your guild to like use the raid buff? Like, I don't think there's ever been a time where I've been like, yes, like I'm buffing everybody. Like, I just don't see their purpose other than to balance things. And like, I don't know, in my opinion, I think in general, like a lot of people focus on M+, but I think raid buffs are actually a lot worse in more casual settings, especially in heroic flex size environments where your guild might have a demon hunter in it, but that demon hunter might not be available to play every night that you guys are raiding, and the losing that demon hunter or that whatever is like feels really bad because you're losing that whole buff. You're not just losing one player. And I think that, like, I don't know. I think the benefit of balancing for the top X%, I don't think is worth like making the lives of other groups worth it. But I could be wrong. I don't know. If you're someone who's this late into the podcast and you really enjoy your raid buff, then I guess type in the comments that you're a druid.
I mean, Squishy, how's it been for recruiting around raid buffs?
I mean, raid buffs are definitely an annoyance to have to deal with. Making sure you have a DH, making sure you have a warrior, making like it is absolutely a pain. I do think there is reason for raid buffs to exist because I do think it would definitely go outside of the top 2 guilds in my opinion if they played 19 Warlocks. I think you'd see probably the top 200.
Well, if they played 19, all right, like
okay, maybe not 19, but you'd probably try to bring like 8 Warlocks at least. Like Unat kind of had that where you would definitely see a resurgence of a class, but
very few guilds have access to that level of like rolling. Anyways, like I think it's just like very difficult to even be able to obtain that. And assuming that the boss is doable without it, like is that even a problem?
I mean, that's the big thing. It needs to be possible without it, and some of the bosses have been really tightly tuned recently.
Yeah. Dude, this is a good tweet. Good link.
I was laughing at that.
Max has already responded to the tweet. Dude, don't even start.
This is a good tweet.
To be fair, I will not really defend Max, but more so give Morgan Day props because I'm the official Blizzard shill. Max didn't say anything about individual raid buffs. He just used the term raid buffs generally. And Morgan Day acknowledged how some of them are just too strong and specifically picked out 2 of the most imbalanced in terms of Arcane Int and Chaos Brand.
He's right.
Made sure he addressed those. And so to say that Max got them killed, like, I just think that as much as people don't like to admit it, I think that Morgan Day in the WoW crew is more in touch with things than people think they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the encounter design team and in the direction that they've been taking, I don't think that Raids and M+ is like a perfect system, but I think that the direction that they've been taking the game over the past couple of expansion has been more positive than it's been negative.
I mean, I think for most people, if they didn't do this, if they didn't say anything, I don't think people would have noticed. I think there's going to be a lot of outrage over this, over what will not be perceived as noticeable.
Why is there going to be outrage over this?
Because people got nerfed.
Oh wow! What's crazy is Squishy's right.
This guy
what's crazy is
what do you mean?
Right,
like... People got nerfed. Like people are going to
get sun rises in the east.
Go look at the Mage Discord right now. I assume people are crying over this. So.
Shout out to all class Discords. You know, I'm a big fan of all the class Discords. Great way to interact, to learn about your class, to find like-minded people, to chat and hang out. You know, real big fan of the class Discords. You know, every single one of them. Shout out to all you guys in there.
Okay, so I guess we can now circle back talking about this Max interview with Morgan Day. I guess the first thing that Morgan Day dropped on us was that there's not going to be a heroic week in future seasons. Are we disappointed in this? I think that high end players are always like they were pretty happy universally, at least the people that I've talked to see Heroic Week return. Again, Heroic Week is one of these things that it kind of slows down the cadence of raid, and in theory, it's going to help the gearing process be a lot smoother for raid just as a whole. But they stated, and like obviously this is the cliff notes, is Blizzard's not planning to have a Heroic raid week in season 2. There are a lot more moving pieces on an expansion launch as well as a lot more item level grind in a relatively short time, so it feels right for season 1 to have that extra week. But players tend to be a lot more ready to hit the ground running when the second raid tier arrives. I did actually agree with Morgan Day whenever he said this, but I will say that I like Heroic Week returning just generally.
I think for me personally, I think the thing that I think Heroic Week benefits the most is them. They get more data and more time to tune their encounters and fix bugs that would otherwise that would otherwise not be fixed if they went straight into, with no Heroic Week. There's obviously a benefit for the high end crowd. Me personally, it feels weird to kind of skip over 2 tiers of content. Like you're skipping the Whelpling, you're skipping the Drake content. Whereas with the Heroic Week, you're starting, preseason stuff, just their open world stuff. Then we have the Heroic Week, which is essentially the Whelpling and Drake, and then the Mythic tier opens, and then you get your Hero and Myth. No matter what happens, like people can complain, yeah, your time getting the content, but as we saw with Dragonflight, people are going to fiend over the tiniest little gear upgrade that they can. So if for people like us, if you're skipping straight to the Hero track and the Myth track, you're skipping essentially some content. You're skipping straight over 2 tiers of content, and despite that being what you want to do, it does kind of feel nice to kind of have a Heroic Week and have those extra little week of content where you don't feel as behind. Plus, the added benefits of always feeling the need to be in Mythic Plus and stuff like that. Can't really speak to the casual side though. I'm not in touch with that as much.
I think M0 being more difficult and more rewarding will be a nice middle ground, because keep in mind, it's not like there's no challenging dungeon content. Like there's going to be, previously people would farm up to +6 or whatever, which is even easier than what's going to be available now. There's harder content available that week. It's a little bit less rewarding than it should be, but at the same time, it's not, because gear is not infinitely farmable. So that M0 gear will be still 13 item level upgrades. But I think what you said, the most important thing is it comes down to tuning. And so there's a lot of people in WoW, I think, Moonkins come to mind, Holy Paladins come to mind, that they don't necessarily show the full strength of their class during the beta. They can kind of keep it, secretive. They can sort of hide what's going on. They can pretend like they're playing things that are, not necessarily the right choices. But the problem is, those people can only hold it in so long. And all you need to do is just put a little heroic raid out there for them, and they just suddenly can't contain themselves, and they have to go into raid and just completely blast and just unveil their hand. And then Blizzard is like, yep, saw that. And then they nerf it, and then it's fixed for when the content actually gets released. So I think Heroic Week is important to sort of trap all the people that are gaslighting about their class, trying to pretend like it's not good, because if there's one thing that those people can't resist, it's parsing and showing off in a heroic raid environment. So also, I think now I did mention I don't think the game should be made worse for everybody to favor the top X%, but I do want to mention that, let's be honest, almost everybody watches the Race to World First to at least some extent, and the removal of Heroic Raid has made the Race to World First so shitty to watch. You want to be excited, especially for the casual people who are still working, who still have schedules. At least you can throw on Max's stream or Gingy's stream or whatever and see how they're progressing. But the fact that everyone just sat and did splits 24/7 for days and days, it made the watching experience, the viewing experience, so much worse for Race to World First.
I agree.
And I think it's worth giving this a try with the M0 stuff. That being said, there's a very, very different environment from the first season of the expansion and the second season. And when you're starting off from 0, from a fresh level 80 or whatever character, to, oh, I'm fully decked out in last year's gear, there's a really big difference for the power level of content. So I actually really, really like what they're doing of first raid, do the heroic week, slow down the gearing, let people savor it a little bit, give them a little bit time for tuning. Then when the next seasons come in, like just, unleash the floodgates right away. Okay, here's the new patch or whatever. Because it does feel a little weird when it's like, okay, here's the new patch. It comes out this day, but it's not actually out. You can't do any of it. Like, time for the story. And I feel like a lot of people who aren't super familiar with the cadence of WoW get a little caught off guard with, limiting heroic week or whatever.
I think they already do this though. Like, think about the Emerald Dream patch. Think about 10.3 or 10.2 whenever they released the new zone, and then you just ended up seed farming for an entire week because the raid didn't release with the patch. Like, the raid is already staggered from the patch.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I guess I think that stagger should be as limited as possible. Like,
yeah, I mean, I would ship the raid with the patch even if I was like.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. I guess that would be interesting.
I don't know. I don't think that Blizzard. I don't know if
the
that
problem,
would be great.
The problem is,
server-wise.
I think there are a subsection of people that want to enjoy the content. Like, I think while that's not for us, I think there are people who want to enjoy the story of WoW and also compete in the raids. And I think that I don't think you should make those people feel like they should be rushed. Like, I think that's a very fair subsection of WoW that should be catered to. Like, you should make you can make the experience slightly worse for sweaty nerds like me to make sure that those people can still, who have been following the WoW story and want to, making those people give up the story of and the leveling or whatever. I think is
Because like people like us, we can just
come back in a week, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there has to be choice. But like, yeah, if people feel like they are making that choice, I actually do agree with you. I will walk that back a little bit. I think that
I'm that person. If raid released the same day as like the story, I'm not the biggest like lore nerd, but like I enjoy doing the questing.
Yeah, you at least want to watch the cutscenes and like read the dialogue, right? Like, oh, hey, let me check out this area, whatever. I don't mean to say like everybody's a story nerd, but like you don't want to feel like you're making your guild, you know what I mean? Like, I'm missing out on 2 items worth of time by spending an extra 2 hours with the campaign. Like, I don't think anyone should ever feel like that.
I do think there's a little bit of buzzkill for hype, though. That's maybe the biggest issue that I have with it. It's just like kind of the patch is out. This is sick, and then it's like.
What's the really stupid like chatter YouTube commenter take about this when people are like, well, Blizzard has to milk your subscription, and so if they released it early you would be done in 1 month, but they gotta milk it out so that you have to subscribe for another whole month.
Growl is so detached from the rest of the community. Yeah, that's how it has to start too.
Yep.
Okay, other stuff. There was a Crest Catchup comment. Where was that? I don't think that they haven't announced it yet, but they're adding a sort of catch-up system for alt character crests. Players will get roughly 30% discount on crest costs across their warband once one character has outgrown the use of those crests. Thank God that they're doing something. Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly what I would have done for alt crest catch-up or later patch crest catch-up, but I do think that this is something that is a step in the right direction. Like Squishy said, I just want to mirror good change.
I think it does almost nothing. I think, so for instance, in order to get that reduction of aspect crest, you need to literally have every single item in Myth 6 of 6 upgrade, right? If I'm understanding that right?
Well, I mean, do you not get...
they said it's not finished. Like, he said it's not completely figured out yet, but that was what I understood it as. I think it'll help for the worms. I don't think it'll help for the aspects. I think it's a small change. I'm good with any change in that direction, but I don't think this is enough either. I would prefer to see something like more crests for timing the key.
That's what I would have gone with. Yeah, I would have just gone with you get more crests progressively. Like, as opposed to like a discount, I would have literally just gone with, you just get more. All right.
I would also say Raid should probably drop more crests too, but it kind of does actually.
Well, they did make a change that went a little bit under the radar. Yes. Now, the last couple of bosses of Heroic Raid actually drop Aspect Crest, which they should have. Like, those bosses are arguably harder than some of the early bosses of Mythic. Like, come on now.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is like a short important thing that people need to realize that they kind of get, I think, baited by top players by this is the faster alt catch-up is, the more quickly you are lobbed for FOTM players. Like, if you're somebody who like just goes into a patch and plays one character and plays what you want to play, for instance, think about like later on in Dragonflight, think about how nasty the situation got with FOTM in terms of like, oh, you need to have AUG, you need to have this, you need to have that, everybody has Vengeance. Now, granted, part of that has to do with balance, but another part of it is how easy it was to get a Vengeance, right? Like, you were not a commodity. Like, if you're playing like, you know, some middle of the road DPS spec, like, you're basically invisible to Group Finder because of how easy it is to roll an AUG or roll a mage or roll a Shadow Priest. And so when you make alt rerolling easier and easier, what you're doing is you're pushing out people who are playing slightly less popular specs for people who are rerolling FOTM. So just keep that in mind, that when you're championing for easier reroll and faster gearing, while that's good for people that want to play alts, you are also like, you know, this isn't making more spaces in Group Finder. Like, for people like when you hear on streams, oh, this is so much easier for me to get groups now. It's like, yeah, because you know what I mean? You're shoving out some less FOTM player with your new alt. You're already some overrated high IO person who can get into groups, and you're shoving out somebody's main in another group with your alt because you can get aspect crest faster. So just keep that in mind, that like there are pros and cons for this. And Dorky has been memeing on me a lot about those, like, oh, Growl loves farming aspect crest. Like, it's not about that. It's about understanding the implications of the game, and about like, you know, the faster it is. Like, imagine if you could never have an alt, right? If you could never reroll FOTM, that would be bad. But also, like, you know, your main would be like, you know, your main would be valuable even if you weren't that popular of a class, right? Because there's going to be way less people playing FOTM classes. I'm not saying that's better, but
I will say, I think that balancing is normally the thing that gets hammered on the most. I will say, hand up, I think the balance looking, at least for M+, balancing is looking like it's better than it has been in the past, going into the War Within Season 1. It kind of resembles like a Dragonflight Season 1-esque season, where it seems like there's a lot of stuff that is like pretty good. So, but I do think that the ability to be able to gear up a bunch of alt characters, I think that at least in the high-end sweaty groups, dude, people are going to reroll regardless. I don't think this really would stop that.
It doesn't stop it, but it slows it down, right? And it brings it, and it takes it like lower and lower down the ladder, right? Like, the easier it is to reroll, the more random FOTM high IO alts are in those groups that are taking the spots of people that would otherwise be mains.
Is it a problem? Like, is it a problem that people want to reroll to something that's OP?
I mean, it's a problem for the people that are playing Ret Paladin and they can't get invited because there's 100 Shadow Priests.
Listen. Sometimes, look at this. Sometimes you just gotta show more meta specs. What's up? Yeah.
Oh man! Look, I'm trying. All you non-FOTM players, I'm trying to fight for you here, but don't give in to the boomkins and the dorky tanks that are sitting atop their throne running the Group Finder. I'm trying to fight for you guys.
I think that you're right in some aspects. I do think perception is a lot stronger than reality, for a lot of these people too. Dude, I've seen so many dog shit arcane mages on the beta. I don't know. I feel like that is the spec that has. I don't know what it is, but I swear that's the spec that has just like the most random FOTM reroller players that don't do damage on the beta. For what reason, I'm not exactly sure. But there is still definitely a level of bring the player, not the class, especially whenever you're queuing into people where it's their first week on Arcane Mage and they don't have hands. Like, all right, come on now. Squishy, any thoughts?
Not overly. I think Growl covered it.
It was a good interview. Had a lot of good topics. You know, we mentioned the most important ones, but you should definitely check that interview out if you haven't seen it yet.
There's a couple other things. I think that Growl probably has the strongest take on this one. It says deaths have become even more punishing in M+, but although it wasn't talked about or announced, the actual baseline timers for War Within Season 1 dungeons are more forgiving than seasons of the past. Is this even true?
Oh yeah, I was. That was one that I was the most surprised about. Basically, he mentions that he thought the timers were more forgiving, and I'm not really sure. Personally, I would, at least from what I've seen, I would pretty strongly disagree. Like, I feel like timers right now are tight. Now, when I say that, timers being tight is a good thing. Let me be clear. I don't mean this as an, oh no, dungeons are impossible. What I mean by this is you have to fight actively and try and do a lot of damage to time the key, rather than, oh, you need to throw bodies at this massively overtuned boss or room. Like, to me, timers being tight is a good way to describe Mythic Plus. So for me, timers being lenient isn't necessarily a good thing, and I think he maybe worded it weird. What I think he meant to say was, we are aware that we're changing the death timer, and like, this is a moving part system, and we are thinking about the overall timer in this, right? Like, we're not just strictly adding deaths to the timer and then doing absolutely nothing in return for it. I think more what he meant to say was like, we're looking at the overall timer and we're considering this when we factor this in. But I would say that's just not true, that the timers are more lenient in this expansion. I mean, Dragonflight, the timers were like ridiculous.
I don't think they're definitely. They might be more lenient than like BFA or something like that, but they're definitely not more lenient than Dragonflight.
Yeah, I mean, I miss the days of BFA when, like, you time a key and you have 2 deaths or 3 deaths. And again, we're talking about a key that's cut, like, at your level of progression where it's difficult for you and the people that you're playing with, right? Like, I'm not saying that every group in Group Finder doing a 10 should be required to do it with 1 death. What I'm saying is, like, when you and your group are pushed to their limits, it should be like, okay, we played this clean, we have 2 deaths, this was a decent key, as opposed to like, oh, we only wiped 3 times, good job. Like,
I find this really weird in a way. It's like doubling down on a death is really odd because you're already losing the person due to like their damage or even a healer,
Checkpoints,
and then they're forced to run back. Especially with some of the checkpoints, that can take 45 seconds, a minute, like on some of the longer ones. And then you're tacking on an additional 15 seconds of timer. Like, why are we doubling down on that? Now, let's say, like, hypothetically, if you were in a dungeon and when you died, you got potted, like the Dreamweaver Soulbind.
Yeah.
You were unable to do anything for 15 seconds or like for 10 seconds. That seems like it's just kind of like a timeout for dying. That's fine. Like you died, you come back, you get a time penalty, but you don't need to run back. That seems fair. But they're combining the run back plus an additional penalty is just so punishing for a death that realistically, we talked about this last week, is likely just going to be blamed on your healer in pug groups.
Well, it was their fault, so.
But, DPS need to have some reason to, some kind of checks in a Mythic Plus dungeon to succeed, and that is the timer.
Whoa.
But,
why are we blaming DPS here? I mean, the tanks can die too.
DPS get to take some blame sometimes, Tettles, but it just feels so overly punishing to not only kind of reduce the timer from having to run back, but also double down and put an additional time penalty on top of that.
Everybody knows that DPS is just a dick measuring contest, and you're not actually there to do anything except for compare yourself on the damage meter versus other people that you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think deaths are already so punishing. Like, I very much agree with that. So the big thing here is timers should be tight, but at the same time, like, deaths are already very punishing. So I'm all for reducing the timers overall of all the dungeons to get them into a reasonable range. But I don't know if making deaths more punishing is really the right direction. I was hoping to see some sort of like, maybe it was kind of heavy copium, but like updating graveyards with every boss or something like that, like some sort of way to improve graveyards or respawns in combination with the timers. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like, deaths are too punishing. Deaths shouldn't be so punishing. But I do like the fact that they're looking at timers and trying to, like, it's hard to say, like, how do you do that? Like, how do you make it so a clean run that's timed at your progression level should be, like, you know what I mean, less than 10 and ideally less than 5 deaths, but deaths aren't punishing? Like, it's really hard to have a world with both. You know what I'm saying?
All right. No typical battle res. No, you're allowed to release, but obviously that's a loss. But you res like the Plunder Storm res. You have to stand on their corpse for 10 seconds.
Oh no!
What an insane.
So you get a timeout, and somebody has to stand on your corpse.
Oh man,
but
don't
you come
do that
back.
because like
as a healer,
gonna die in a ground effect. Like somebody's dead in a ground effect, you're not getting them. Like, what does that even? There's no way.
Bro, as a healer, you think any DPS would waste that much time trying to res me? I would be dead on the floor every time I res for the whole dungeon.
Dude, you can't even get a warlock to press battle res anyways.
Exactly.
The last thing I think that was maybe interesting, Morgan also said this. He says Trash is designed very intentionally with both filler spells and important abilities. I think that this use of the term filler spells is maybe a bit lost on me. Maybe it's because I'm so jaded of playing at a high end, but I swear to God their filler spells hit just way too hard. Like, maybe it's an issue of if we're playing an infinitely scaling system, that might be the problem, but I swear that their filler abilities just straight across the board hit too hard almost at every single keystone level.
Yeah, I think that was a huge, like, we talked about how Morgan Day gets to show more under the hood of what's going on. And I feel like that was a huge sign to me that, like, okay, I figured out what's going on now. Like, you know, there are spells where they sort of see a mob as like an archer, right? Like, this guy just sits here, he just shoots, like, that's his job, right?
Yeah.
But he just does too much damage. Like, if that mob is meant to just, you know, put out damage constantly, then they're just dealing too much damage, especially when you have those mobs in combined with unavoidable group damage. So like 2 examples, I know this is like well, I guess I'll just be more general about it. Let's say there's a mob that's doing random damage like that. That's okay if there's no unavoidable group damage. If the only unavoidable group damage is that archer or that caster, then those spells, you know, quote unquote filler spells, basically what he means is a mob that just recasts a bolt over and over again on random party members. That's okay if there's no other damage that's going out, right? But if that mob is in a literal pack with a mob right next to it that just blows up and does 80% of everybody's health every time it blows up, it's like these 2 things can't really exist. Or to have like, you know, 3 of the guys who bolt in the same pack, well, like, you know, having all of them bolt the same guy just means that they die and there's not really that much you can do about it. Like, I think they just need to be way more careful. They either need to nerf these quote unquote filler mobs, or they need to be way more considerate with where they go. Like, a good example is like, okay, let's say there's a bunch of mobs that like hit the tank really hard, and then there's a couple mobs that do frontals, and then a couple archers that, or filler mobs, right, that cast and do damage. Like, to me, that's reasonable. But like a mob that just slams the ground and does a bunch of everybody's health every 20 seconds combined with a filler bolt mob is just not really good design.
So I have an example on screen here, and this is from Arakara. I know that not every player is like done beta keys or really is going to understand exactly what's going on, but just for point of reference, all you need to know is that there are these web mages that are in this pack. These web mages have 2 abilities. They have a bolt, and then they have web bolt volley. The web bolt volley, if it goes off, it's going to kill you 100 to 0. That makes sense. It's just a required kick. We see these fairly often. This hulking bloodguard is the only other mob that matters in this pull, and this hulking bloodguard, similar to what Growl has described, does an unavoidable slam on the ground, which does, I don't know, 30% of your group's HP. The problem is these web mages are spamming their cast on CD. The volley is a required kick, and this pack is the Bloodguard on top of that. So if any of the bolts go off at the same time that the Bloodguard's slam goes off, there's just like not really much counterplay that you're going to do to that. And I think that's why it more or less feels bad, is because in the past, the counterplay would be press a stop, right? And they won't recast. But they've added a lot of mobs that spam cast. And on top of that, they changed how stops work, where like these mobs are literally just like spam casting web bolt at you.
I think Morgan's answer came from a casual 10, the weekly 10 perspective.
Yeah,
like that's where this answer was, and I'd be curious to see if he's asked specific, because with the affixes, they've clearly acknowledged there is a difference between people who want to key push and people who are doing your weekly 10s.
Yeah.
And this answer, I think, is very clearly targeted at the weekly 10s. I would love to see his answer if he was asked specifically about these spells in an infinite scaling system. Because these filler spells no longer become filler spells, and every single one of them is a death spell.
I would say I would give a little bit of pushback to saying that even in a 10, if you're letting the web bolts like free cast, there's very little and I'm not talking about like tuning. I'm just talking about just in general. You replace this with any mob. There's very little recourse if you're just letting this mob chain cast. Like you're probably not living. You're probably not living. Like if the mob is just free casting and you're only kicking the volley. And that to me is, I think Rob described it best when he's like, they described them like they're archers. So archers, whenever they cast their shoot ability, it's more or less fine because they're not hitting you for 30% of your HP over and over and over again. They might at like a really high level, but like in general, it's uninterruptible for a reason. Whereas for this, it's tuned to be definitely stronger than an archer, but Blizzard views them similar to an archer that's casting shoot.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what they're if they're gonna do anything else to support that high end gameplay. Whether it be capping the filler spells at a certain key level and like maybe certain abilities just no longer scale past 12. We've seen that with bursting and some of the old abilities, affixes that is. Or maybe there's another solution that they can think of just to kind of help that higher scaling keystone level. But for the casual 10s, I don't think there's too much of an issue here, assuming they get the tuning right.
Agree. Like
Okay.
the main challenge of those mobs is to get them in, right? Like, okay, kick the
Mhm.
bolt guy so it runs in or grip it or whatever. Like that's what they want. And for lower keys, but to be fair, like again, when we talk about 10s, we're also sort of, doing it tongue in cheek because also that's like being very over geared for a 10, right? Like, we say weekly 10s, tell me about how easy these bolts are on 10s on the first week of the expansion or the second week of the
Sure.
expansion. Like
Well,
you're
that's a
gonna
push
get fried
key.
by those bolts.
Well-
So yeah, exactly.
Well, Growl, you get a mage, you have them press polymorph.
True, CC.
Yeah,
Yep, you're
just
right.
like the Cata days.
Dude, okay, random rant of the day. Actually, I have 2 rants of the day, so you guys can go grab a drink or something. But first rant of the day: whenever I see people, in Classic we CC'd mobs, or in Kata we CC'd mobs. You didn't CC mobs in Kata or Classic. You CC'd mobs because it was 2010 or 2005 or whatever, because you sucked. Like I played all of Classic. I literally cleared all the way through Nax and Hardcore. We don't CC packs. I played Classic. I played Classic Kata. I did every dungeon. We farmed up heroics. I didn't CC any mobs. If you were like a random guy CCing mobs in one pack, you were just dumb. Like, and I guess like the ability to do that if you want to because you think your group sucks is fine, but to act like this was somehow the norm that everybody CC'd in packs, that's not how people play Classic. That's not how people played Vanilla or Cataclysm or anything. And yeah, the other rant is, since I guess we're done with this section that I wanted to include before we get to the questions part. Have either of you have been playing the Fellowship Alpha? I know we can't really talk about it much, but
No, I did.
do you guys even know what Fellowship is?
I know what it is. It's so for those who don't know, it's basically it looks like a WoW spinoff. It looks like just like a dungeon based. If World of Warcraft was only dungeons, it looks like
Yeah.
that.
So basically, it's if M Plus was a standalone game.
Yeah.
So like, imagine you log in, you can just go on any single character you want. Like there are still level up in gear and talents, but it's only the stuff that you get from M Plus, and then you just literally do M Plus. Like that's all you do. You just are in a lobby, like a garrison. You can invite people to your garrison. Once you have a group, you queue up for M Plus. And I think I played it a little bit. You're not supposed to like really talk much about it, so I don't want to go into detail, but I will say it's definitely worth like being on the radar for. I don't think it's a WoW killer, but I think it's something that people, if you enjoy M Plus, you will find this an interesting game. I would encourage you guys to like be checking it out and seeing what sort of stuff that they post, because I assume they're going to start posting more about the game in the future. Just looking at what state it's in right now.
Is it fun?
I mean, I have 30 hours on it this week. So
Oh my
I mean,
god. Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I think that World of Warcraft does this really well, is I think the combat in World of Warcraft is pretty unmatched. How is the combat in Fellowship? Does it feel? How do the specs and the classes feel? to play?
It's very, very similar to WoW.
Okay.
Again, without saying too much, like I would say it's like WoW. Like classes don't have as many spells. Like you can kind of see in the preview that classes have like 14 spells per class, and you don't start with all those. You get them as you level up. But combat feels like very, very, very WoW inspired.
Okay.
I would say the best thing about it, maybe to like sort of sell people or to give people a preview, is like, while they have Mythic Plus dungeons, they also have these things, what you would call adventures, which is basically like a third of a dungeon. So imagine you could do an M Plus where it's literally just like a handful of packs and then one boss, and it's got like a 10-minute timer. And it's actually insanely cool to do with people who are not really into M Plus, because it's a lot easier to be like, okay, let's do this adventure. They only have to learn like a small handful of mechanics, right?
Yep.
Like imagine trying to explain somebody all of, Siege of Borealis to your new friend, or like, your significant other or whatever, right? Like there's just so much, but just to be like, okay, there's 4 different mobs in this dungeon that you need to worry about. This is what they do. Here's this one boss. This is the main gimmick of the boss. It's like such a cool bite-sized thing where like, I'm in a Discord call with some people that I don't know how seriously they take M Plus, but like they're people that I don't know. And after, a 30 minutes or an hour into a session, we're like, they're like, okay, we should call kicks on this guy, and it's like, holy shit, like that's what you do in M plus. Like, oh, what if one person baits this? And I'm just like, yeah, like you just figured that out. That's really cool that you thought of that. Like, I wasn't gonna be nerdy and talk about stuff like this, but you're learning this stuff as someone who might not really know that much about M plus, and so yeah, I think it's something to be have on your radar for sure.
Absolutely.
Wishy, do you have any rant of the week?
I did my rant earlier on the Lobbing stuff.
What is this link that you have in our show notes?
We can
He was trying to save it for later, and
right.
then you just made him use it. Holy,
later is now, dude.
All right. Well, Mirez released his weak aura for the War Within Season 1. I think a lot of people use this weak aura. In previous seasons, it just adds next to your nameplates a little box showing the spell cooldowns for important mobs. I used it, I think, in pretty much every season in Dragonflight or something like that. And yeah, the Season 1 for War Within is here, and I will be using it. And if this helps others, please use it.
This is like a goated week aura. It's a little bit, there's a lot of clutter if you're not super into M+, but for basically anybody that like needs to learn about things, it helps you understand how long because no one, like, you never know how long a mob's cooldown is, right? Like, is it going to be 10 seconds? Is it 20? Is it 40? And so just having a little box next to each nameplate really helps you learn things about what mobs do and how to like work around them. And yeah, so, like, for example, let's say you're a class that has a 24-second kick. Like, you have no idea if you can kick every single one. Like, did you mess up? Was there something weird? Was there a stun? But like, you can literally kick it and you can see, oh, it says 18 seconds. Like, hey, someone else get the next one,
Yep. I mean, I think it also has anti-sync tech added to it in previous seasons, where like if like a bunch of birds are on cooldown or something, or like available to be cast, when one cast, it'll reset the cooldown of the others, so you know how long it'll be. It's very, very useful.
I think that for an average M+ player, if you're looking to get better, this is probably the quintessential weak aura to have. It's basically the same thing as like timers for every single ability, and just having that knowledge of when specific abilities are about to be cast or specific things are about to happen it's just very important to know. It also, if you want to like shot call your group, I know it's not for everybody, but it makes shot calling in a group also substantially easier.
Oh, for people who are looking to get into M+, what a great, interesting segue that we can go into our question and answer section of the podcast, which actually I've seen you've selected some absolute banger questions. I was looking at these before, so shout out to everyone who's been submitting questions. I'm ready to yap about all these.
Were you being sarcastic? Dude, I thought I picked some.
No. These are actually banger questions. That's the problem with using sarcasm is like such bad humor, because then I don't say something sarcastic and then it sounds like I'm an asshole or whatever, right? Like, no, these are good questions. These are hella good questions.
Yeah, I think that we've been actually getting great questions. Again, continue to send messages to the Bench Podcast on Twitter. We've been actually getting a decent amount of Q&A. Shout out to everybody who continues to tweet at us, DM us Q&A. Some people are DMing me as well, in just some Q&A. Now, let's ask. We got the first question from PJ. He says, hey, I want to toss in a question for Q&A. I just recently joined a guild and want to make the best of it. I was wondering if anyone had tips on standing out as a new player in a guild, aside from just doing more damage. I'm playing ranged DPS, and it's a heroic guild, but I'm trying to build back up to mythic rating. Thanks. Wishy is a raid leader of a guild and somebody who takes recruitment pretty seriously. What do you think is the best advice that you can give for this guy?
Besides just doing more damage, is not dying. If you die, you are probably noticed a lot, and that is usually not a good thing, because that is kind of the other thing that I think a lot of guilds pay attention to, is just deaths and how often people are dying, which will obviously affect your damage as well. The other thing I would say that I think is kind of underlooked and not really known is making sure that you are the one doing the important mechanics, and being very good at them and not, screwing it up, and having a very high success rate, because consistency is key on a lot of raid fights. You want to be the guy, you want to be and practice, stuff like the carrying the seed on Farak and not blowing it up. You want to be the person that What is a good example?
Never got hit by the Rashok waves. Whenever everybody's looking at enemy damage taken by Rashok waves, you were at the bottom.
There you go. Just even though it's not mythic, showing that expertise and getting that practice in of dodging the mechanics, making sure to follow, and have a good understanding of the mechanics, I think are all very things that can help you stand out.
What do you think about log chasing? Does it?
I think a lot of guilds put emphasis on log chasing. I think it depends on the guild that you are looking for. I think it's never a bad thing to be able to do well. A lot of guilds value DPS very highly, so I do think that is something that you should try to be able to do. But in addition to everything else, yeah, I think that's about my summary there.
Yeah, I want to echo what Squishy said about having jobs and being the person that does jobs. Like, when it comes to standing out in your guild, if you are concerned with, like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm in on every fight, that my raid leader acknowledges me, that gets me gear, like, that sort of thing is generally what people are asking for. If you're that guy that the raid leader knows they can say, hey, do this, like, that is so valuable for that, because, like, okay, now every single time you're doing this fight, they're like, oh, well, we literally need this person to be in the raid. So not only are you, like, the raid leader acknowledges that you're good, but you're also like, okay, well, this guy's in all these fights, so we're going to need, he's going to get slightly more gear priority on average. He's going to be a person who's not going to get sat. Like, that's just such a good thing you can do. On top of that, once you become labeled as sort of the mechanics player, that's now you're out for any time your damage is bad, is you can just be like, well, I'm the guy that does the, the stupid ducks on Council of Dreams, or I'm the guy that does this job, so I don't have to do good damage. And I think when it comes to log chasing, the most important thing is that you're capable of it. Like, I know it's fun to do the raid over and over again and be like, oh, I'm going to get a 94, and now I get a 95, and now a 96, but, like, if you can just get a good parse once in a fight, like, then just, you know what I mean? Like, then you need to focus on consistency. I know it's not really fun, but we're talking about trying to stand out, not trying to, like, have fun or be good or whatever. But
yeah,
like, just like, if you can't literally post a wall of good parses on every boss, then you need to get to that point and be able to do that. But, like, it's not like the difference between having a 90 parse on every boss and a 95 is not going to move you up a bunch of guild ranks. Like, I'm pretty sure you'll have the exact same number of interviews with the exact same number of guilds if you have a 90 parse on every boss and 95, but you'll literally have, like, 3 times as many deaths during farm if you try and go for 95s on everything versus 90s.
Yeah. I think one more thing that I want to mention is just, like, understanding of the fights. Most people know the fight and what to do, but not why. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they don't know how to resolve mistakes. If something goes wrong on a fight, correcting that mistake because you know the mechanics is a very useful skill, or even just being able to help others learn the fight. So, like, if you're getting into the first boss of Mythic or something like that, you go watch a stream, you go watch Growl wipe to the first boss a couple times or something like that.
Do not watch me or my guild learning anything about raid.
You find out why they wiped, and then if that, you can try to avoid making those same mistakes in your own raid and helping to teach your guild and stuff like that how to not wipe that way as well. So I think that's kind of another way to avoid that.
So I will say, and this is maybe a little bit more aimed towards Mythic than heroic level raiding, but if you can also make yourself irreplaceable in some aspects on a boss fight beyond just, like, how much damage you do, that's going to ensure that you're going to be able to be the best player that you can possibly be. And this can be, like, really subtle things. This doesn't have to be like, oh yeah, I'm just bringing the raid buff or whatever. This could be subtle things like you do one specific call out that your raid leader needs you to do, or you're trying to help out your raid leader in some aspect. That makes you irreplaceable, and that means that you're in every single week, and that's great.
Yep.
Oh, and there's so many different things. Like, okay, if you're a healer, dude, nobody wants to do the healing cooldowns. Like, if you're the guy that spends time and looks at a VOD from a similar guild and copies their healing CDs, like, grats, you're in for every single raid fight for the rest of forever. Like,
yep.
There's a lot of little things. And let me be clear, like, being an owner and doing a lot of damage is very, very important and your primary role. But the problem is everybody else in your guild is trying to do that. So while it's true that you do want to get good at that, and, like, I'm not trying to overlook that or say that you should be a mechanics player, but, like, though these are the secret hacks that we're teaching you over, everybody is going to be trying to do good damage. Like, we don't have any advice. Like, you just have to keep practicing and get better when it comes to that and work harder than everybody else. Or you can walk around and be a duck and then you're fine and you can keep your raid spot.
Dude, you run a Council of Truth. I have a bow to pick if that's fight. I've never DPS that fight ever. I'm always a duck. Like, always. I've never.
Jangbi is a duck. I am the duck main when I'm in that boss for farm.
I mean, I played Og Evoker on a frog. I would buff, I would get ducked, and then I'd go do my thing, and then I'd get out, buff, and then leave. Like, I don't know. It was a perfect job, but I've never done that.
I will say, at some point, you're gonna have to get a log on some of these boss. Like, especially if you're doing like a primary mechanic at some point, like, and especially if you want to like jump into a new guild. I kind of expect that you're gonna be going from like a heroic guild to like a mythic level guild at some point. At some level, like, especially if like the job you're doing is getting ducked for 70% of the boss fight, you're gonna have to get a log at some point. Like, we're gonna have to be like, all right, somebody else is doing it this week. I can think of like a couple of fights that happened to me on like the first boss of, gosh, what was that council fight that was in the not raid? Oh gosh.
Oh,
I was Moonkin tanking that fight perma, and I just like permanently had a gray parse on that boss because everybody else
like, damage buff.
Yeah,
I mean, okay. But again, though, I would almost argue that it's sort of like in your head, right?
Guilds,
like if you're a person, again, if imagine you go to Squishy and you have 8 bosses where you have good parses, and then one boss is the stupid Moonkin tank boss. Squishy would just laugh and be like, "Yeah, nice, you're the Moonkin tank for the guild now, right?"
Yeah.
Like, does that even hurt you? The fact that you can't...
you know what? That's a good point. Actually,
yeah,
it might not.
I think, and again, right? I'm all for, dude. How bad does it feel when you have orange numbers on every single one, and then this one random fight, it's like gray,
20,
and it feels terrible. Like,
but
my point is, you're gonna have to negotiate that with your raid leader. That's not necessarily something that's gonna get you bonus points. Is telling him that, okay, 1 week make this other person Moonkin tank because I need to parse. Like, that may actually lose you points.
It just completely depends on your guild. For me, Mythic raiding guild, I don't look at damage like 90% of the time. If we're missing a DPS check, I'll look at damage, but otherwise, I only pay attention to mechanics and people failing mechanics. So it's completely up to the guild and whatever guild you're trying to apply to, or whatever guild you're in currently. And you kind of have to figure that out and play to whatever they're looking for. That's kind of the best thing.
I'm also a stickler at looking at amount of healing done to targets with debuffs whenever I'm looking at like for healer progression.
Oh, that's some Jeeth stuff. That's some Jeeth stuff.
Sometimes if something's going wrong and I just get really agitated and I'm just like, dude, I'm pulling up the locks. That's something I'm looking at.
Dude, nobody likes a padding healer.
Okay, moving on to the next question from Beans Guy. Says, hi, what role do you think is more in demand in high key / title range for Mythic Plus? I'm equally comfortable in healing and tanking and want to push for title in War Within, but don't have a group to play with and will be pugging. I'm EU if that matters. So it does matter. European pug scene, a lot better than the American pug scene. In terms of advice, I don't think that it's going to be like that much different, but I do think that your ability to be able to pug title, particularly on EU, is a lot better than your ability to be able to pug title on NA.
I think the things that are in most demand, I'm maybe a little biased because I play healer. I would say number 1, tanks. Tanks are just by far the most demand. You will have an easier time pugging up all the way in every rank as tank. Number 2, probably healers. Like, I think healers are also in demand. With healers also comes, like, if there's ever a very difficult class in the meta. So, like, for example, last season was Shadow Priest and Fire Mage and Og. Everybody and their mother rerolled Shadow Priest and Og, and Fire Mage was hard, and it was really hard to find a good mage. So if you do FOTM reroll, keep in mind that everyone's going to FOTM reroll the easiest ones up. So if you want to be desired, look for the hardest class. And again, it's not easy to do, but on top of that, the last thing that's very important and needed, and this is more so with title range, is the organizer. The person who's willing to like send messages, hey, be on at this time, or like let's play, or who do you want, you know what I mean? Like, that sort of thing is very, very important and needed. And I think that no one ever wants to be that guy. Like, no one ever wants to be the guy who sends a healer, hey, you want to play on Discord, a message 4 times and gets ignored, and then sends it a 5th time. Like, everyone will give up on you. But if you're that guy, then maybe the 5th time that healer will say yes, and then that's your new, like, push healer or whatever.
Yeah, I will say, I think that in terms of what role is in more demand, I think that tank is definitely in more demand, but I think the bigger thing with tank too is that you have a lot more agency over your own gameplay and your own success. I would give the success of the group, especially at like title range, probably 70 to 80% of that is based around like what your tank is capable of doing, the pulls that they're going to have set up in advance, and how they're able to like kind of handhold you through keys. And so I think that whenever you're playing tank, you are able to get you have just a lot more agency and control over what the group is doing. Of course, it's not full agency. Sometimes that dumbass DPS is going to die and brick your key. There's not really anything you can do that there. But like if you're like a really well played tank, you never die. That's going to increase the consistency of your ability to be able to push high keys. And echoing the sentiment of something that Growl said, you don't necessarily need like a full 5-man stack, but if you get a healer or you get some people that you play with consistently, and say you pug, say you're playing with the healer consistently, you are the tank, and then you pug 3 DPS in your group, that's going to increase your odds of being able to time keys by a substantial amount. You don't need like a full 5 stack that you always run with, or you're organizing groups like that. But if you just have like 1 or 2 people that you play with fairly regularly, that's going to help you a lot.
I don't push high keys, but I pretty much agree with all what you guys have said there. Like tanking is always going to be the bottleneck, even in low keys. But
random. I'm going to combine the last 2 questions actually. So we talked about standing out in your guild in terms of your raid leader, but we didn't actually talk about like what if you want to be known by your other guildies and like you want them to invite you to stuff. And a huge one for me is early in the expansion or early in the season when people are gearing up. That's the best time to sort of play with people and get your feet wet and sort of get to know people. Like I've had so many people, and I'm not trying to pretend like I'm like some hotshot or something, and sorry if you're any of these people, but like if you message me 4 months into the season and be like, hey, I'm ready to start pushing keys, you ready to heal for me? I'm just like, dude, who the fuck are you? Like, yeah, we raid together, but like, you know what I mean? Like I barely even know you and you're trying to like get me to log on in some time. Like it's just weird, right? But like if he messaged me on week 1 of the season and I was bored and I needed to farm this dungeon and we were playing, I might be like, hey, this guy's kind of an owner. Then when you go to message me in 4 months, then I'm like, oh yeah, maybe we'll, you know what I mean? Like I feel like you have a way better chance to get your foot in the door with players who are, let's not say better, but let's say more known than you, or maybe are not likely to play with you otherwise, if you're playing with them early on when they're just trying to gear. And I mean, that even comes true with not in a guild as well, just like pugging. Like you're way more likely to meet some total owners in Group Finder, just like spamming some dungeon on week 1. But by the time it comes to like 4 months into the season, like these people have all, you know, they have their groups and stuff. Like they're going to be playing with mostly the people they play with and not much else.
I'm an absolute psychopath sometimes, and if we need a group or we need like a healer or we need a specific role, I will like open up Raider.io. I will like click on that specific role. I'll scroll to about the range of score that I'm looking for, and then just like click on their Raider.io profile and like DM them on Discord if I need somebody.
I mean, but again, that's how I was saying about the organizer, right? Like nobody wants to do that, but like you never know who you're gonna find. Like that's a great strategy.
It's terrible, but somebody's got to do it.
It's terrible, but at the same time, like you're getting title every season.
You know what's more terrible? You know what's more terrible? Only having 4 people and not being able to play.
Yep.
Okay. Next question from Summoner. He says, many times I hear you give advice that IMO is aimed or directed at already pre-existing mid to high tier players, just sort of trying to improve. If you were an AOTC player attempting to bridge the gap into Mythic, what advice would you give? As someone who's sort of flopped back and forth between AOTC and entry-level Mythic in my experience, the differences in approach between those 2 types of guilds are massive, even if at the end of the day, an entry-level Mythic guild only kills 3 or 4 additional bosses. Chris, you want to take this one?
I'm going to be toxic, so yeah, you guys go first.
It's a little broad, because just sort of trying to bridge the gap there. So I think the biggest thing is finding a guild that has the same expectations as you. If you're only, you know, like if you're looking for the first couple bosses of Mythic to kind of have your foot in the door, and that is what they're going for, I think that is kind of the first step, to find a guild that will, one, allow you to get in, and then secondly, be on the same pace as you kind of learn and how to grow from that spot. Was that something, Tettles?
Yeah, what I will say is, dude, there are so many guilds that have like 15, 16, 17 people, and they get AOTC, and they say the same shit every single tier. They go, we're going into Mythic next week. We're going into Mythic next week. Just know those people are never going into Mythic. Not next week, not the week after, not the week after that. You need to, honestly, what Squishy said is like factually true. You need to find a pre-existing Mythic guild. Like, you're not just gonna turn this heroic guild into some mythic raiding experience. And yeah, bridging that gap is a thing, but I think that at some point you have to find a guild that's already already doing mythic, and they don't have to be like a cutting edge level guild, but they need to already be doing mythic. Like, we can't be, we're going into mythic next week, because it's just never gonna happen, man. They're never going into mythic. I'm sorry, your friends just aren't good enough, and you're not getting 20 people.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like very similar to the Growl talking about, or like Tettles mentioned about organizing, or Growl talking about messaging people. It's, you just got to shoot your shot. If you want change, you got to make it happen, and that comes with anxiety and all this other kind of stuff. But you just got to start messaging people. Most of the time, you're probably going to get told no, but if you keep at it, eventually you're going to find something that will fit you, and they will want you as well, and then you can see how that goes. So I think that's kind of like finding a guild that will take you into the entry-level mythic is going to be difficult. But if it's something you really want to do and want to commit to, do it. Go for it. But then there's
Growl.
also, you want to go? All right.
You want to crush this guy's dreams?
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? If you want to be good at something, it's gonna take some work, and you're gonna have to sink some time into it, right? And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but like, the reason that there's not much to it is because there's not much discussion about it is because all of the tools that you have to get into that, I'm starting mythic rating, or I'm starting to pug higher keys, that's all available. Like, all that stuff, like guides about how you play your class, guides about being an owner, learning to do good damage, like all you need to do is just read the stuff that's available, learn what's available, and like watch streams, and then just go do it and play the game and get good. Like, there's no magic secret about like how to do your rotation. Like, you just have to open up the Wowhead guide or a video or however you learn, and just be good at your rotation. Like, I'm sorry, but like, if you're in an AOTC guild, like, you're probably just leaving tons and tons of damage on the table. Like, you're just leaving tons of healing on the table, to the point where you can dramatically improve your play by just spending time reviewing footage of yourself playing, or reading guides, and just learning. Like, it just isn't really that hard to get to that point where you're like doing decent damage and doing decent healing and like surviving the mechanics. Now, it does take time, and not everybody has the time to sink into it, but ultimately, like, my first season ever playing WoW, I was like, I really like this game. I'm going to work really hard at playing it. And I moved up basically all the way to a cutting edge guild in one tier and this is like not really knowing people, right? And ultimately, like, I was putting in such absurd amount of time and effort and work into doing it, like way too much and way more than I needed to. And you don't need to go that fast. But like, so for an example, like when I applied to my first cutting edge guild and I had a trial, I found all of their kill vids and all of their progress, and I studied all of their pulls, learned all the cooldown timings of the person that I was replacing. Like, I had everything set up. Like, I knew all their talent builds for every fight and what they did and, where they stood. And like, when I walked into that first raid for that trial, like, when the raid leader was like, oh, by the way, I'm like, nope, I already know. Like, I watched this guy's video, I saw all this, and like, granted, I was kind of a super tryhard, and maybe that even showed off, and that wasn't the perfect way, but like, you know what I mean? Like, no one needed to tell me, like, I don't need someone to tell me to do that. Like, that, all that stuff was available, and I found it, and I just used it. So yeah, I don't know. Just be willing to put in the work if you want to get good, is what I'm trying to say.
I have a bit of an anecdote.
What were you saying? Sorry.
That's where I was going to go too. Just like, you need to put in the work if you want to do this. You have to put in the work, not only from finding a guild that will take you, but also from a personal standpoint. As Growl said, there's lots of resources out there that will help you do that, but getting the experience, spending hours at a target dummy, watching streams. I know some people can't learn like that, but watching streams to see how they move. And I think the biggest thing is analyzing and recording your own gameplay. You can look at yourself and kind of be like, why did I push this button here? What could I have done differently? All very, very good things to help you improve to the next level.
I'll just give a little bit of an anecdote. I started relatively late compared to a lot of when other people started playing World of Warcraft. I started like in the middle of Warlords of Draenor, and I got so addicted to like playing World of Warcraft and like that feeling of improvement. Every single day, whenever Blackrock Foundry was out, I would pug a Growl. Growl was like the patchwork fight of the tier, and I would pug a Growl, and I would try to improve my log on Growl every single day, right? And then after that, I would log it. I would go and look back at my rotation, and then compare it to the other people who had better logs than me, and look at their rotation. And that's like, and it was like insane dedication to something that like I was just trying to improve at. And then at some point, just by spending that much time, spending that much effort at trying to improve, I just became naturally much better than everybody else that I was like raiding with at the time. Then at that point, once I was like aware that I was like much better than the people I was raiding with, I knew that I had to leave that guild like immediately. And similar to Growl, then I just joined like a cutting edge guild almost instantly, because there's like a level of dedication and almost being like crazy about like improvement that like if you give it, like you're able to grasp it and like join a cutting edge guild relatively quickly if you're putting in just a ton of effort.
Yeah, I mean, I was the exact same way. Like, I specifically remember in Aldir, the first tier of BFA was like when I learned about what logs were and how I could look at what other people were doing. Like, was literally I would just go into a random pug heroic and just, all right, let's see how far these guys get. Like, I would have like 20, 30 kills of a boss after like week 2, just because like I was just let's do this again. What could I have done here? Like, oh, this fight I keep getting owned, and like eventually I learned that healing parses were a complete meme, and you actually want the stupider your team is, the better. I learned that, right? But again, that's how you learn, right? You figure these things out. So again, like you have to put in the time, I think, and that's why you don't really see that much information about like, oh, how do you go from AOTC to cutting edge, or like somewhere in between there. And it's simply because like just getting really good at your class and not dying and like playing the game a lot, like unfortunately, you just have to do Arakara City of Echoes 25 times before, like, I made this joke on stream the other day where I died to this boss, and like, I raged, and I'm just like, well, this is the 70th time I've done this boss, maybe by the 100th time I'll stop, you know what I mean? Like, even me still, like, I make the dumbest mistakes, and I play like a clown sometimes, and it's like, it's just repetition. Like, it is a hard game. I'm not trying to say it's not hard or it doesn't take time, but like, unfortunately, there's no shortcuts, you just need to do.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think you need to look at and figure out what it is that you are missing. Are you missing some skill in playing your class? Are you struggling with raid mechanics? Are you struggling with, finding a guild? Are you struggling with, any number of things? What is the thing that is actually preventing you from progressing? Is it just a lack of dedication? Maybe you're not that interested, but you want it, but don't want to put in the time. All these things are, very valid, and finding out what exactly that is will help you more directly address that problem. Addressing how improving your own skill at your class is very different than finding a 2 out of 8 guild, a Mythic 2 out of 8 guild.
Yeah.
And so figure out what you want, and then you can more directly target it.
Yep. All right, final question from Sean. He asks, how do you find people to push keys with consistently? Most of my friends play more casually and only enjoy raiding, but this upcoming season, I like to push M+ and go for title. My friends will get KSM, and a few of us drag our way to Keystone Hero with pugs every single season, but I'd like to find a consistent group to play with for higher keys. The first piece of advice that I'm going to give you, I think that people... And I actually think that I think you're moving in the right direction. I think that trying to find a group is the most important thing. But I think that some people are unwilling to play with a group unless it's like a pre-made 4 stack and they're the 5th player that's going into it. You don't have to find people to push with consistently like that. I think if you can actually find like 1 or 2 people that you enjoy playing with on a regular basis, that can actually go a long way. And then if you say pug the remaining like 2 or 3 slots in your group, that actually helps your group a lot. As for how do you find people to push with consistently, what do you think, Growl?
That's so important, by the way. Like, stop trying to find a group. Like, there's no magic secret oasis of people that you can just find 4 people that need a 5th. Like, just find 2 people, find 1 people. And unfortunately, like, there's no secret oasis. Like, you just need to go into Group Finder. Like, you just need to do keys and play with people and be like, okay, this person was good, or like this key went well. I think the biggest mistake by far that people make here is their expectations and what they want is just so high. Like, they go into a key and they're, let's say you're 2,500 rating, whatever that means, and you play a key with a guy and he's 2,800 rating. Oh my god, this guy must be good. Add to friends list. And then he doesn't accept, or he doesn't want to play with you. And they're like, but Tettles says add people. It's like, well, yeah, because that guy's 300 rated higher than you. Like, you're trying to take value, right? Like, I mean, basically the way that I got introduced into like high keys and started doing very high stuff was Dorky, right? Like Dorky was playing an off meta spec and it was harder for him to find groups. Like he doesn't walk around like he looked at me and he found me and he's like, okay, well this guy's kind of dog shit, but he at least listens to what I have to say and he's willing to learn. Like find these people who are lower than you who you can invest in and play together, right? You're way more likely if you're 2500 to find a tank who wants to play with you who's 2350 or 2400, and you're going to be able to do keys and have a push session together. Whereas like if you invite the rogue because he's 2900 and he has 400 points, like he's going to look at you and be like, what key are you doing? Right? Like, why are you even DMing me? Again, not to be rude, but like you're sort of doing the same thing by only adding people who are way higher than you, right? Like if you should really try and look for like, again, not to try and like talk shit about people who are lower rated, but look for the gem in the rough, right? Find some guy who's lower rated than you but seems to be good or played well, or like, oh, this tank is clearly in a good guild but he just doesn't push keys that much. Like who knows, like maybe it's some guy who's trying to get into M plus, and like I think everyone's expectation for who they add is like way higher. Like if you run into Tettles in a group doing a 15 and you add Tettles to friends list, like is Tettles going to be in your push group now? Like probably not, but some random guy who's 100 points lower than you, you timed a key, like why not add that guy and see where that goes?
I would also ask the question to you of like how good are your friends, and are any of them actually interested in like pushing for title, and are they like kind of capable? If they're not good enough to push for title, we might be talking out of line here, but say like one of your friends is good enough to push for title with you. If you and them have like a pretty serious conversation and you like, you have some stuff that's going to end up being like decently meta. It doesn't even have to be like absolute top of the line, but say it's like close enough, or you're playing a tank and you're making the group, because that solves all problems anyways. Then I think that then you can like start to fill up the rest of your group, maybe with people from LFG, and you can start small. You don't have to start with like a full 5 stack. Like, I think that people have this barrier to entry of like pushing keys is like, we have to have a full 5 stack at any given moment. And while you'll watch streamers and they're playing with a full 5 stack, that's not how the experience has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that how I first started was basically like, I would pug, like sometimes you do randomly find a group that needs you, but like that's so rare. Like for example, when I started doing high-ish keys, I played with this other bear tank and then a hunter, and we were a 3 stack. And it was like we were totally the off meta squad, right? This was when everyone played Prot Warrior and Resto Druid, and we played Bear and Mistweaver and Hunter. And it was like, but we would, hey, let's log in, and all 3 of us would get in. We'd pug some people, and then every once in a while we'd find, and of course we'd run into these DPS players, right? You guys, the guys who were just like, I need to find a 5 stack. But the thing is, we had the pickings, right? Because we had the tank, we had the healer, we had the organizer, and so like we could take literally guys who were 100 or 200 rating higher than us at that point, because they were so desperate to try and find a quote unquote group or whatever that we had set up. But if you just find one person and find 2 people, like stop trying to find, everyone just dreams of like having this group of 4 people and everyone's higher rated than them and you ride away into the sunset together. Like that's just not how this shit works. Like you're out there in the trenches. Like they call it the trenches for a reason. Like you just find one person, find 2 people, add them, do keys together. Like maybe on a weekend you find a guy who's cool, and then you have a 4 stack and you're like kind of owning. Like that's how this stuff gets started, like for sure. You think like I just met Dorky through like some app about like, oh, let's form a group together.
An
like
app.
and like be willing to learn too, and like be willing to work with people. Like a really funny thing to like talk, everyone's someone might critique what I'm saying, like, oh, just find Dorky in Group Finder, but like the healer who played with Dorky, this is not Drogo, by the way, I taught when he realized I was playing with Dorky and we talked, one of the things he told me was a problem with Dorky is that he always has to have things his way. And it's such a ridiculous thing for anyone to hear nowadays, because it's like, Dorky just fucking owns. He's one of the best tanks. Like, why are you doing anything any other way, right? But to Dorky, like, he's out there in the trenches and people just aren't willing to listen or try the things that he has to say. And like the fact that I was willing to listen and try things that Dorky wanted to do made me more appealing of a teammate and got my foot in the door where someone else kind of got their foot out of the door for that reason, and it's just like, I don't know, give people a chance, like try stuff, be willing to learn.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to be a lot of messages, a lot of rejections. But eventually, like just like the raid thing, if you want it, you got to keep at it.
Dude.
Yeah.
The Raider.io skimming thing, OP, by the way. If people have their like Discord linked on Raider.io and you just like cold DM somebody on Discord, first off, they're gonna think you're fucking crazy. But people more often than not actually just want to be invited to groups. And so like if you're explicitly reaching out and be like, yo, you want to do some keys later? People will be like, yeah, whatever, man. Like, like you're weird.
That's literally how you conned me in BFA to tank for you.
Dude, you got to DM people. Like I DM Growl, be like, yo, Growl, you want to like key tomorrow at like 4 p.m. And sometimes Growl doesn't DM me back, but I don't give a fuck. And then the day after that, if we're keying and I need a healer, I go, yo, Growl, you want to key tomorrow at 4 p.m. And then he'll be like, yeah, sure. And I'll be like, yeah, we're back.
Bro, seriously, shout out to that Borgeron guy. That guy, like, he doesn't care. Like, I just respect that guy a lot. I didn't really know him that well, but he would DM me and ask me to key, and like, you know, I'll be honest, in Shadowlands, he played Vengeance, and Vengeance was kind of dog shit, and we had some rough keys back in Shadowlands, but that guy just doesn't care. Like, he would just DM me, yo, you want a key? Sometimes I might ignore him or not respond for, like, you know, like 2 weeks because I'm busy and I'm doing stuff, and, like, I wasn't there when I got the message, and he's not playing anymore, but, like, okay, now that guy's Discord is literally probably popping off more than any NA player right now. And most of the top NA live key guys are in that Discord hanging out together. And it's literally single-handedly because Boar just doesn't care and he just is going to, oh, I have time to play. I'm going to do keys. I'm going to spam everybody. And like, he's a tank and he wants to organize all that shit. And it's like, that's how you build that network, is you just have to get out there. And I know there's a lot of people who listen to all the stuff that we just said, and they're like, nope, actually, you know, high keys aren't for me. I'm not going to do this. And it's like, that's cool too. You know, it is a lot of annoying work. Like, it's not for everybody. But if you're really looking to, you know, try and do this, like, this is the things that you need to do.
It is a pain in the ass to pug title, is what I will say. If you have a group that you play with, any semblance of consistent, it is noticeably easier to try to get title. It is very, very difficult to pug it.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, the end goal is you need to find people that you're willing to work with and that want to work with you, and you're essentially getting them to swipe their social credit card on you. You need to, like Growl said, you need to be, what did you call it? The diamond in the rough?
Yeah, the diamond in the rough. You need to provide, you need to
be that person to others so that they value you, and that is hard. Because you need to impress, maybe with a little, schmoozing. But who knows?
Or just buy consumables. Allegedly, the reason that we started playing with Chow and BFA was, Dorky says, and I quote, he was the only mage that had attack power scrolls. And as soon as I saw that, I knew I wanted to invite him.
Oh my gosh, that is so troll. All right. Any final thoughts for this week's episode of the pod?
No, that was a banger.
Dude, that was insane Q&A.
Delves next week. Delves next week.
Yes! Delves! Yes! All right. Goodbye, everybody.